Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to this conversation. It's a topical conversation. It's a conversation about the use of marijuana in the island and the possible discrimination and some of the other topics that are quite timely concerning. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome the MP for the area, Sylvan Richards, is standing at the back. The Honorable Sylvan Richards.
Good to be here.
Myself, I'm Senator Diallo Remain, and I'll be the moderator for tonight. What I want to do is first introduce you to our panelists that we have. In the center, we have Senator Mark Daniels. Mark Daniels will be speaking on the PLP's bill that is currently before the House on decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana. To Mark's right and to my left, Mr. Michael Brangman. Mr. Michael Brangman will discuss the myths and try to answer some of those questions about marijuana, its uses, and some of the wild stories that are out there concerning such. And on the far left, on Mark's left, is Mr. Alan Gordon. Mr. Alan Gordon will discuss medical uses and spiritual uses of marijuana. What we're going to do today is we're going to have the panelists speak for about between 10 and 15 minutes each, and then we're going to open the floor for questions from the crowd. The purpose of this seminar that we're having today is to not just hear us speak to you, but we want to hear the questions that the average Mr. Bermudian have about this topic that is out there now and the sorts of things that you might be thinking about it. We have now 3 people who can answer probably 99% of the questions that you might have. And with that, I hand the mic over to Senator Daniels so we can begin.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming here tonight. It's definitely good to see you. It's definitely welcome to have many individuals who are here willing to obviously listen to panelists, but also to offer some feedback to us, moreover from the government and from the opposition standpoint, to take some information back to our respective political parties so that matters can be canvassed in a bit more detail. Effectively, what I wanted to start off tonight by just saying is that the Progressive Labor Party, under the stewardship of our leader, Mark being JPMP, he asked us to look at the issue of cannabis in Bermuda and cannabis reform. And it's a very important issue, obviously, because it's affected many lives within this country. It's something which, my background being a criminal defense attorney, something I see pretty much on a weekly basis, from everything from possession, growing, handling, supply, importation, and the like. And so this affects a lot of Bermudians. And in particular, this is a discussion which really looks at issues to the very core, issues of race will feature, issues of class, gender distinction, and the like all feature when we look at this particular issue. There's also the spiritual connotations, human rights elements, and so from a justice perspective, it's something that is of paramount importance, and there's no time like the present to look at particular issues. It's important to understand, because many individuals would ask, why have we drafted this particular bill, and why have we drafted it to a certain extent? Some have looked from a critical standpoint and said, well, how come we haven't done more? And so I think it's important for us to at least canvass and open up why we take the steps we have. As an opposition, we're not allowed to bring what are considered money bills. And so as an opposition, we can't bring to the table legislation that would canvass issues such as licensing or forms of tax. That's something that is wholly within the remit of the government. And so in that context, while we certainly have discussed, and I've had the pleasure to investigate and do some research in relation to looking at a full regulatory model for the country, certainly from the angle as our Shadow Minister of Finance, the Honorable David Burks, JPMP, had alluded to in our reply to the budget, looking at ways in this very hard economic climate of trying to generate revenue. And that's something that is certainly of concern to all of us in terms of looking at ways that we can create new forms of business and money for our people. Not just from the perspective of jobs, but also from the perspective of entrepreneurship and self-empowerment. And that's certainly been a message from our leader looking from a political lens of how we can try and empower our people from a social as well as economic context. So with respect to what we've tried to do, what we've looked at is a decriminalization bill in all intents and purposes, but it's an amendment to the Misuse of Drugs Act. And so when looking at the Misuse of Drugs Act, there are pertinent sections such as Section 6, which is possession, handling under Section 7, cultivation, and the like. And so what we've looked at is saying that under our current law right now in Bermuda, because when we first went public with this, we discussed having 20 grams as amount that individuals can have in their possession without having criminal liability, so to speak. And some people ask, well, 20 grams, and I saw a lot of posts online and in social media and the like. I've heard government personnel talk about, is that going to be 40 joints, or it's a lot of weed to carry on a person at a given time. And so I think one of the things that I'm sure the panelists will discuss is the application of cannabis in this country, because not everyone who would consume cannabis is looking at it from the angle of smoking. There's also eating as well as drinking. There's medicinal use as well. And so if anyone's been watching CNN lately and Dr. Sanjay Gupta, which seems to be getting some traction, and most times in Bermuda we like to look to foreign sources to at least feel comfortable to discuss a particular topic, and this is certainly a taboo one for the way that many people have been treated in the past. We're seeing a certain movement going forward where there's a lot more acceptance in Europe, the United States, Latin America, yet this is a plant that has grown throughout the beginning of time and has been accessible to peoples all over from the beginning of time for various purposes. And so from our perspective, what we looked at was the Misuse of Drugs Act, and under one of the schedules in the Misuse of Drugs Act, without getting into all the very particular minutiae, our current law treats anything under 20 grams as being deemed for personal use. Now 20 grams is a very arbitrary number because of the way that cannabis or any drugs are sold in terms of weights. And so 20 grams is 1 gram shy of 3/4 of an ounce. And so that in and of itself makes question marks. Whoever drafted that particular aspect of the law, what was in that drafter's mind when they thought of 20 grams? For any individual that actually uses cannabis, consumes cannabis, or carries cannabis, oftentimes you'll have posts from half grams, 7 grams at a time, if you're looking at quarters. And so a quarter would be 7 grams. And so, for example, individuals may take 7 grams, go on a Friday night, buy 7 grams, use that 7 grams over a period of time. Depends on usage, of course. And so an individual who's, let's say, going from work, buys 7 grams, and wants to go home, no intention to be out publicly, just wants to be a private individual. Many individuals can get caught under what's called a Section 315F search. And that's a new law that's been put in place under PACE, where individuals might be searched and they might be found to have 7 grams in their possession. And what I've seen from a practical standpoint going to the courts on a daily or weekly basis is that many individuals who are caught with cannabis, and we see a lot of reports in the Globe Gazette, Bernews and the like, Bermuda Sun, is that you have individuals caught for a gram, 2 grams, 3 grams at a time. More times than not, that might be an individual that took something from that 7 grams if they didn't grow it themselves or the like, and they might be going out to a dance or some other type of place or just an environment where they want to relax, and they're getting caught with a very minuscule amount of cannabis. And so the question is whether or not that is an issue that we should be treating as a criminal matter. From a personal standpoint, I think that drugs, period, are a health matter, and they should entirely be within the remit of a human being to decide what they want to do with their body, while understand that we want to have protections and controls. And so what we try to do from a legislative standpoint when looking at this particular amendment was to say right now, in a very short order, can we create a framework whereby individuals, and more often than not, you're talking about males or black males who find themselves before the courts of cannabis. I say that in the context of race because of the way that our statistics show how Section 315F searches work and operate, and who find themselves before the courts. And so once an individual is found before the courts, they will be labeled with a criminal record. They'll either be subject to fines, failure to pay fines, they can be facing with imprisonment depending on how many times they've actually been caught. And you certainly can be looking at custodial sentences. And there are many individuals in this room who might have personal experience or families that have experienced incarceration as a result of what might just be constituted a nominal amount of cannabis. And so what we're trying to do is eradicate that right now. We're looking at obviously the budget at this current time. We look at resources that are being allocated under police and our security, so to speak. And so what we're looking at is saying, okay, in one breath, can we eradicate a lot of the police work that might be involved in just trying to persecute and prosecute small amounts of cannabis? Can we enable a framework whereby we're thinking of things in a very mature and in the round type of scenario, where we're effectively trying to say that for small amounts of cannabis, people can effectively get a pass and not be treated as criminal. And that's our primary goal, because criminality can be a stumbling block to seeking employment, and certainly as a stumbling block as it relates to travel. And so that can affect seeking education as well as further work opportunities, or just having quality of life. And so for individuals who might have health concerns, you can have a criminal conviction for, let's say, I know someone very close who got caught with 3 Cs and has been on stop list for over 2 decades, a decade and a half. And so I think I can be quite bold in this regard, but it affects politicians too. And so my leader would be proud to say that we certainly want to look at this issue from a very holistic standpoint. Now, in terms of what kind of effects this amount of cannabis would have by being found in possession, what kind of safeguards can we create and look towards, what we try to do is create some statutory safeguards in looking at children and the like. And so we were saying things where if you had someone who's under 18 years of age, wasn't of the age of majority, and the police had suspected that the individual might have had cannabis in their possession and it fell under the prescribed amount. We had initially started with 20 grams. We extended an invitation to the government when we presented it to say we were open to debate on looking at making it a lower amount if 20 grams would suffice, if it seemed like it was too much. I think there's been some discussion about looking at 14 grams, and certainly the further amendments that we put forward had 14 grams, which is a little bit more of a round number, but also looking at it from the angle of trying to have some give and take. And so from the perspective of a young person under the age of 18 years old, of age, if they had, for example, 7 grams in their possession and the police suspected it, the police would still have powers to search an individual. Where it was a minor, we were saying that the police would have the powers to take that cannabis from a minor, because at the end of the day, they are still young people. But for individuals who are over 18 years of age, we were saying that we wanted to have an approach where the police could engage and be able to effectively give a warning to say, listen, don't smoke in public, we're not asking for that, and we're just saying allow the individual to go about their business without being brought before the courts. And so that's a real brief summary of the spirit and intent of where we were trying to take it. Of course, many individuals will have some fear and trepidation as to what we're trying to do, and other individuals are saying, please go further. And this is one of those talking points where certainly we want to have the minds around the legislative table, hopefully working together with a very comprehensive and holistic view of looking at what the best way forward is. Now, of course, the government has, in their throne speech, said that they are looking at the cannabis issue as well, so I certainly would like to commend the government for taking that bold step as a government and looking into it. There's another formal body that has been created and has been doing some research, and we certainly commend the individuals who have taken those steps to do the necessary research and to try and present something to the government, which hopefully will be brought to us. And I understand the Minister of Public Safety said that we should hear some things by next month. But in the context of what we propose, we are really looking to try and stop individuals coming before the courts with immediate effect. And so hopefully that will have some impact on our society. And so the gentlemen that are to my left and right, I don't want to take up the microphone tonight. I'm really here for the context of trying to invite you as members of the public to really give us the feedback of what you might envision or what you would want for this country. And certainly those ideas that I would like to take back to my political colleagues and share and advocate on your behalf. I will quite boldly say that I am an advocate for cannabis reform, and I personally would like to see us consider much wider options. I think it is necessary. I think we have a golden opportunity. And unlike another hot topic like gaming, where we seem to be maybe a decade or so too late, I don't want that to be an issue in regards to cannabis. We just have to find the right balance, which is going to ensure that members of our community are protected, but also put ourselves in a position where we can actually empower our people. And I think that this is a real immediate way that we can actually take those steps for individuals to become empowered both socially and economically. So with those remarks, I'd like to pass the mic to my right.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to start off talking about some of the myths surrounding cannabis. One of the reasons why I really started to get involved with public activism was I had a debate with a police officer who told me that weed was dope. It's all dope, it's all the same stuff. And I had a big long debate with him, and I showed him the science of why it's actually different. So I just wanted to go into some of that research and give you some resources so you can go away and basically look up what I'm saying and see if it's really true. There's a resource called Google and PubMed.com. Everyone can look up and find these things for themselves. So one of the most common things that people say about cannabis is that it causes schizophrenia. So if you look at the effects of cannabis, which taken from Medline Plus, one of the biggest things that it says is relaxation, sleepiness, and mild euphoria. Some of the possible negative side effects are tachycardia, irregular beating of your heart, decreased short-term memory, dry mouth, and impaired perception and motor skills, and red eyes. Everyone knows about red eyes. Those studies basically said that these effects cease with abstinence. So if you stop using cannabis, then these effects go away. But when you cross-reference that with the diagnostic statistical manual from the American Psychiatric Publishing, one of the criteria of diagnosis of schizophrenia is delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech and behavior, and other symptoms that cause social or operational dysfunctions. And these symptoms must be present for 6 months and have at least one active symptom. So, if you're going to say that, someone got a little paranoid from smoking a joint, maybe they had too much cannabis and they're not used to maybe a form of loud, which we like to call, it still wouldn't be a diagnosis of schizophrenia because, under the DSM, you would have to have those symptoms for over 6 months. Another thing that people say about cannabis is the 30-degree carcinogens. When I was in high school in Berkeley, police officer came to our school and was telling us that cannabis has 30-degree carcinogens, and the whole school erupted, basically booing the officer and telling the officer she don't know nothing about cannabis. But I hadn't really researched myself until I came across this study from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, California Environmental Protection Agency. And listed under those 30-degree carcinogens were polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which is basically is a long term for tar. So any organic substance that you set on fire will produce these things. Any organic substance, from grass, anything. Also listed on that list of 30 carcinogens were heavy metals. And I found that quite interesting. How would heavy metals automatically appear in cannabis? It just would. So it listed lead, mercury, nickel, cadmium. Those are the heavy metals there. But you have to ask yourself, where would these heavy metals come from? If the cannabis is grown in a safe environment, not safe, but an uncontaminated environment with soil that's been tested, where would the mercury come from? So it begs the question, how is it that they've been telling the whole world that cannabis has 30 carcinogens when it's quite possible that the test material that they actually used for this original study was contaminated? And on top of that, it was misleading as well because it's talking specifically about cannabis smoke. And there's Dr. Robert Melody, who we Skype called in a town hall meeting we had last month, who has a study out about cannabis and tobacco smoke not being equally carcinogenic. And the reason why was because the cannabinoids, the active constituents of cannabis, exert an anti-tumor effect on the body. There's 3 different methods. 3 different methods in which they exert an anti-cancer effect. And also, the point was made that if you don't smoke it, for example, if you eat it or if you use a vaporizer, you wouldn't get the polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And as well, if you had cannabis tested properly and grown in uncontaminated soil, you wouldn't get heavy metals. So that deals with that aspect. So I came across a guy called Rick Simpson. He has an organization called Phoenix Tears. And basically what he does is he takes indica strains of cannabis and he extracts the oil from them, concentrates them, and he gives them to cancer patients. And what he is seeing with this foundation with Janet Sweeney is they've actually been able to put several cancer patients who have stage 4 terminal cancer into remission. So when I came across that, it's like basically, shatters the whole perception of cannabis. So all this time people have been saying that cannabis causes cancer, and then you dive into the research and you see that cannabis actually exerts an anti-cancer effect. Now, if you compare chemotherapy, which is the chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, which are the 3 big treatments for cancer currently, if you look at cannabis, the worst that can happen with these cancer treatments is that you get high. Now, if you compare chemo, if you take too much chemo, you can die. Even if you take the correct amount, you have hair loss, you have extreme diarrhea, you have nausea, you can't keep down food, your whole immune system gets wiped out. And while I'm not trying to say, don't take chemo, I'm basically saying that cannabis shows great potential as anti-cancer treatment, and that alone should really stick in your mind as to a reason why we should think of it in a different way. Now, we talked also with Dr. Laszlo Brinsky, and although we understand the political motivations behind, having a 14-gram limit or 20-gram limit, in actual fact, the treatments for, say, cancer, for instance, was concentration dependent, meaning the more you take, the better it works. Well, while the law, as we checked it out, did list cannabis resident and cannabis in the same category, so that basically covers that, so you don't need to even go there. So, yeah, cannabis is an anti-cancer remedy and is being used in the United States and Canada for especially terminal cancer patients, and it's been effective in bringing their cancer to remission. Now, when you look into the pharmacology of cannabis, you're going to get to discover certain terms. One of them is the endocannabinoid system. Now, endo meaning inside your body, and cannabinoid is a type of molecule. There are two main cannabinoids that we know of: THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and cannabidiol. THC mimics endogenous neurotransmitter called anandamide. And anandamide is what's called the bliss molecule. Now, another important point to think of is what's called antagonist and agonist. So if it's true that cannabis is bad for you, then if you was to take something, say, an anti-cannabis drug, then it should be good for you. Makes sense, right? So they created a drug called Rimonabant. And Rimonabant was a diet pill, because basically, anyone who smokes marijuana, you get the munchies. It basically is an appetite stimulant. So they figured if you give an antagonist, which will block the effects of marijuana, that it would decrease appetite. And it actually did. The majority of patients that took Rimonabant lost a lot of weight. But during the trial, the patients actually started to commit suicide and got really depressed. So the drug was pulled from the market, and we now see it in the States and Canada again. So it's important to remember that cannabis is part of your body, and the form it is anandamide and 2,8-G, which stimulate the CB1 receptor and CB2 receptor. So there are a lot of diseases that are treatable with cannabis, and if you keep that in mind, that what cannabis actually does is mimic the system that's actually inside your own body, and you keep it in perspective. Just one website, encod.org, European Coalition for Just and Effective Drug Policy, lists 700 medical uses of cannabis sorted by diseases, and they all have resources that you can look up and see the actual science behind why they're useful to treat these diseases. And another thing to remember before I hand over the mic to Alan Gordon is the major difference between opiates and cannabis. As anybody knows, opiates such as morphine, heroin is opiate as well, and codeine. These are very effective pain medications, but you also get side effects. And the biggest one being addiction. You can get constipation, and as well you can get high, very, very high. Now, one of the differences between, say, overdosing on cannabis and overdosing on an opiate is that if you overdose on an opiate, because you have receptors in your brainstem, it will stop the impulse to breathe from getting transmitted from your brain to your body. So you basically stop breathing and you die. But that's not the case with cannabis. You could take, as much as you could physically take of cannabis, and you'll get really, 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 really high, but you won't die. So cannabis has been described as one of the safest therapeutic substances known to man, and I think for that reason that's the reason why we should be looking at cannabis from a different perspective, and that it's not actually dangerous like people think it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening. I want to thank the PLP for organizing tonight's event, and my fellow panelists here for their public service, and you for coming out and speaking up. Before I go into the speech I have prepared, I just want to speak briefly on what Senator Daniels said about the extension of the PLP as an opposition party's ability to introduce a bill that would bring change. No, I'm not satisfied with the PLP's proposed bill, but it's as far as they go, and I recognize that, so I'm not here to criticize the Labor Party over it. It's just they are going as far as they can. Anyway, back to what I had written for tonight. The main thrust of my activism lately has been pushing for patient access to medical cannabis oil, because taken orally in large doses, it can kill cancer and stop a number of other serious ailments in their tracks. Michael spoke briefly about the Phoenix Tears Foundation. We've been working with the people there. They're claiming that late stage post-chemo, post-radiation, post-surgery cancer patients coming to them for cannabis oil, 70% of those patients are going into full remission, all cancer gone from their body. That's pretty astounding, and we can expect that that rate would be higher if people came sooner. Cannabis oil has shown great promise as a potential miracle drug against cancer and other debilitating and fatal diseases. But unless we have a supply of Bermudian-grown medical cannabis, and a lot of it, we cannot yet offer patients this product affordably, legally, and safely. These patients can't wait for the law to change. Not if somebody's life or basic human dignity is at stake, we shouldn't wait. When a man has MS and can't control his pain or even the movement of his body without cannabis, I'll provide him with cannabis as a safer and better alternative to the medicines which have failed him. If cannabis oil can save a cancer patient's life, I will see to it that that patient gets cannabis oil. If a dying cancer patient is too far gone to save, and cannabis oil can just help him come off of morphine, let him eat and sleep, and give him just a few more days and a lot more comfort, I'm not going to sit back and watch him suffer just because of a failed law that causes more harm than it prevents. Society expects the law to be generally fair and decent, so when it lets us down in that regard, we begin to lose faith in the law's goodness. For that reason alone, I'm a staunch supporter of growing medical cannabis on island with or without legal reform. Aside from the medical cannabis issue, I've also been spending some of my energy addressing the authentic religious use of cannabis, which often has medical connotations. There are at least 1,000 Rastafarians in Bermuda. Many of them use cannabis in a religious context. I'm not Rastafarian, but my Bible, the Standard Bible, refers specifically to cannabis in both Testaments. Under a strict literal translation of biblical law, 1 in 36 males is born with some sort of neuroendocrine condition for which daily medical cannabis use is a legal requirement. My Bible simply says that, and I am not inclined to ignore it. Now, our Constitution here in Bermuda guarantees us not only the right to believe as we see fit, but also the right to practice our religion of choice. But, conflictingly, we have a law which bans religious use of cannabis. Our Constitution says that a law can only interfere with the fundamental right to religious practice if such legal interference is reasonably required in the interests of public safety, public order, public morality, and/or public health. I say that the cannabis ban is not reasonably required to preserve the public safety, order, morality, and health, since the ban has failed to achieve any of those objectives. The cannabis ban cannot be said to supersede the fundamental right to religious practice, because this law cannot accurately be said to be necessary for public safety, order, morality, and health. The law brings none of those things, but instead worsens. The law worsens the public safety, order, morality, and health. The law fails the test, and so religious use must be permitted. When one's religious belief also involves a religious duty to save the lives of dying people, the government would be hard-pressed to argue that some other public interest outweighs the value of those human lives. In living out my duty to preserve human life, so far I have already referred 6 Bermudian cancer patients to United States cannabis oil suppliers, Those patients can afford to go overseas and they can find relief where it is safe and legal. But that's not good enough. Some cancer patients with whom I work get sent overseas for radiation, chemo, or surgery, and they get cannabis oil for the duration of their stay there, but they can't bring it back with them. And they can't afford to stay in the US for the 1 to 3 months of daily cannabis oil that it will take to get that cancer's ass. Public Safety Minister Michael Tuckley has invited 2 cancer patients to apply to him for a cannabis oil import permit. But no legal supplier in the US or elsewhere is allowed to export it. So the import permit offer is worthless, mere lip service. I'm sure that the Honorable Minister did not deliberately commit this cruelty, but it is still a cruel trick to play on the dying, whether deliberate or not. I also work with other cancer patients who simply cannot leave the island at all, either because they're too sick, or because of immigration problems, cost, or some combination of those factors. $600 worth of legal cannabis oil in the US, a 2-month daily supply, can cure cancer, but here that $600 worth of medicine would cost over $20,000 at street prices. It is simply not affordable while it's still illegal, and it takes time to grow, and that's time some patients don't have. The island's cancer sufferers, MS patients, and other gravely ill people need clean, legal medical cannabis right now, and a lot of it. Since the Minister for Public Safety has not used his powers under Section 12 of the Misuse of Drugs Act to establish guidelines by which people can have permits for and actual access to real medical cannabis, I feel forced, in order to save lives and as a matter of religious duty, to simply do what it takes to see this medicine into patients' hands by implementing my own reasonable guidelines. There are those people who tell me this is inadvisable, that I need to be more patient. The patients who turn to me for help do not have the option of waiting. They are out of options and out of time. Any delay in getting them help could cost them their lives. There are those who urge me not to take the drastic step of breaking the law, and I say to them, this law is no longer of any effect. If following a law causes an innocent person's death or severe discomfort, then that law does not apply in the circumstance. A law's mere status as a law is not what makes it good and right. A law's goodness comes not from its enactment, but from its consequences. A bad law is not made good merely by virtue of being a law. Instead, such a law erodes the integrity and respectworthiness of the whole system of law. It cannot be said that any judge in 1939 Nazi Germany should have enforced ethnic cleansing, property confiscation, and arbitrary detention laws. We did not rightly sit back during Hitler's reign and say, well, it may be unfair, but the law is the law and must be enforced. It may seem to some that the drastic example of the bad Nazi laws is too extreme an example, but I'm here to tell you, as a Jew whose family line was 95% eradicated from the planet over a few days by Nazi troops, those Nazi laws dictated who could live and who must die. Those Nazi laws purported to protect the one true religion and persecuted those whose practices harmed no one, but which were merely offensive to or spiritually wrong in the eyes of who? The Nazis. And those Nazi laws made distinctions between human beings, taking away legal rights, property, and ultimately life itself, based upon some trick of suspects' genetics. So no, the war on cannabis patients and Hitler's war on non-Aryans were two very different wars, and yet some lessons can be learned by the comparison. One, laws which cause people to die or needlessly suffer are not even real laws. They are as if written on water and must be abandoned in all ways by all persons and all institutions. It is never okay to sit back and watch someone die if they can practically be saved. When the life is on the line, you do what you have to do, and then you sort out the paperwork later on. It's not like we're robbing a liquor store to pay for Granny's surgery with medical cannabis, there's no victim, no one loses anything. 3, it is never okay for a government to tell anyone how they may or may not practice their faith, so long as they're not hurting anyone. True, we no longer stone people to death or poke out their eyes in retribution, even if the Bible says to. But when the Bible says to allow a life-saving medicine, no one should step in and say, you're not reading it right, you're wrong, and so your religion should stay illegal. This is a fundamental right we're talking about. If it isn't important to you, it's important to at least 1,000 Rastafarians in Bermuda, and it's important to me. I think we owe those Rastafarians a little more respect. And when we push for change, we should think less of what it will gain us personally, and instead we should think more about what we can do to help those most in need. When we proceed with reform, we need to look after more than our own selfish interests. We need to look after the Rastafarians who feel compelled to use cannabis, whatever the law of man says. We need to look after the dealers who for some reason keep risking their freedom and physical safety by feeding our personal possession habits, which is somehow seen as more wicked than our dalliances, as if getting us our cannabis is somehow more sinful than our use of it. These smugglers, dealers, and growers are our brothers, sons, and fathers, and we need to look out for them too. We need to look after those people currently serving time for feeding their habits, or those under travel ban for it, for they have suffered for our sins, and they suffer even more for the sins of any politician who stands in the way of or even delays their release. Last but not least, we need to look after the cancer patients and other gravely ill persons whose lives and comfort hangs in our collective hands. It is not enough for any of us to stand back and wait. It's not enough for any of us to reap the benefits of cannabis reform if we do not look after the least among us, the ailing, the prisoners, and the faithful. There are 2 steps we must all take. The first step is learning and knowing what is right. By being here tonight, you've shown you've taken that step. The second step is doing what is right. And there's more to that than just telling government what to do. Someone has to plant that seed and tend that tree and make sure that patients don't go without. Waiting for government to give permission will cost lives. The seed needs to go in the ground. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, panelists. I think we've had a good description of, 1, the potential decriminalization bill that the Progressive Labor Party has put forth. We got Michael Brangman to give us some good information to debunk some of the myths that are out there about the use of cannabis, and we've had Alan Gordon give us some ideas of what can happen if we move swiftly to provide an avenue for people to practice freely their religion or get the necessary medicine that they need to cure some of the diseases that ail them. What we're going to do now is open the floor to questions. Anyone who wants to ask a question, please put up your hand. I'll come to you with the mic.
So if the bill is passed, how is it going to work with the whole possession under 20 or 14 grams for importation? Because if no one's growing it and you're not allowed to grow it, how are we going to get cannabis on the island?
Excellent point. Questions of possession. And the focus that we have taken with respect to the initial draft was on possession. We did not contemplate importation. The reason for the importation, of course, one thing with law is that law is very arguable in different ways. And so when looking at the law, of course, there are different statutory offenses. So what we specifically addressed and looked to try and address was the possession and handling aspects. What were not addressed in terms of the cultivation and the importation. One of the reasons is obviously that, of course, this is a game of politics. And I don't want to say a game of politics and just be dismissive. But in terms of having genuine purpose and intent and trying to make progress and move forward, I'm not trying to make this a entirely political discussion or make any criticisms of what we have one government representative here, which is very positive, but I don't want to use it as a platform to try and attack government when they don't have a right to go without taking the microphone to address a response. But what it is about is trying to actually make headway. And so what we're trying to say is for, in the first instance, because as we've heard on two different sides, the medicinal arguments, my personal understanding and research is that whether it was 20 grams or 14 grams from a medicinal standpoint, it's not really an effective amount. It doesn't canvas that. One of the things when I tried to argue, even when we had discussions internally for the 20 grams, was it was a little more akin to what can be deduced for some oils in that context. So that's the medicinal side. In terms of what we were primarily focusing on was the amount of individuals who go before the courts on a daily basis, and what can we do to stop that practice of especially young people, but even elderly people. It's not just about an age discrimination. We just have to protect young people. Adults will make conscious decisions to do as they wish. The question is whether or not cannabis use should be treated as a criminal offense. And so while we certainly entertain the medicinal and we want to see progress, without doubt, on the medicinal aspects, that much we don't shy from. But the context of what we were looking at is because, like you said at the very beginning, the monetary aspects, when looking at these aspects, we have to consider, are there going to be licenses? Are there going to be taxes? These are all things that we can consider when we develop any type of regulatory model. But those are things as an opposition that we don't have the power to bring to the House of Assembly. It's actually contrary to the rules that we work with and the confines that we work with. So what we were saying was if we can show a proactive mindset, stop negative behaviors right now. What do I mean by negative? Someone getting locked up over the weekend, detained for a period of time, brought before a magistrate on a Monday morning or any other day of the week, being told that you have this cannabis in your possession, it's a contrary to an offense, and we're going to give you a criminal conviction. And so if we can stop that practice right now, one, resources are being allocated from the police not to deal with that type of smaller amounts, so that actually becomes a cost savings. But also in terms of just the human element, the lives, we're trying to save lives, so we can stop another person being made criminal on those aspects. Now, the next steps in terms of making progress, certainly I think that issues of cultivation should be considered. But when we look at cultivation, again, there are these question marks that we have to arise and we have to ask. If we're going to allow cultivation, do we allow cultivation in the context where any one of the members here tonight can just grow in their own house? And there might be questions to that, because you might have neighbors who have children. Those children, they might object to growing outdoors, for example, because there might be night farming. And so to protect the risks of a child going into their neighbor's yard and taking cannabis, these are a lot of things that have to be contemplated in a very comprehensive review. What we're saying right now is, can we stop the process of people going before the courts for nominal amounts of cannabis? And so that's one of our primary focuses, and that's where our agenda is. Now, arguably speaking, someone could try and say, well, I only brought in 10 grams because I went on a trip, I had a good experience, and what I experienced when I was overseas is nothing like home, and I want to be able to just kind of prolong that experience a bit more. Well, we understand that context, and while the weight might be the same as if you had just acquired it here, and that's one of the shortfalls in the actual bill itself. The shortfall is, well, if you're going to be able to purchase something under 20 or 14 grams, where's it coming from? And so if it was grown locally or whether it was imported, those are issues that have to be contended with. And this is certainly issues that we would encourage and debate. But it's about looking at the fundamental issue of the right here and now. Can we stop individuals at the very first stage being brought before the courts for these small amounts? In the context of an individual leaving their home saying, I want to go to a friend's house, I want to go to a dance and different places like that, right? And so of course we look right now, there's going to be other question marks. Can you smoke in public? And so those are things that we try to say in terms of fostering relationships between the police and the community. Because right now, if you're smoking in public, you're going to be seen as the enemy and somebody's got to try to lock you up. But how many times have you been to a session, a dance, a party, or anything else, and you smell the incense in the air? A police officer might be in a place and they're not arresting people, they might be selective about who they arrest. These are all things to take into consideration, but it's a step-by-step process. And so ultimately what we have to do is approach this from the angle that while the government, the opposition, are charged with the responsibility of discussing the laws, we represent the people. We should never forget that. So not being afraid to come forward and say to your MP, whether they stand on the government benches or the opposition benches, this is what I'm looking for. I think this is necessary for the country. And in terms of bringing that dialogue to the heads of government, at the end of the day, we have to serve the people's interests and never forget that, and not try to dictate what's best for the people. But in the context of what we've proposed as a very initial first step, I think it's a common sense approach to say we have not stopped the quote-unquote war on drugs, as it relates to cannabis in particular. We can stop making these individuals criminal who are brought before the courts for simple possession. So it's a great question, but unfortunately, the spirit of what we've drafted does not address that sufficiently, but hopefully with greater dialogue with the government and in time, we can work on these aspects. The real issue of time is the criminality, because I would love to not see somebody in court tomorrow, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the following week, and etc. And as Mr. Gordon said, I would like to see the opportunity for individuals to get pain medicine, to have medicine to try and alleviate their diseases. But again, we are not at that stage yet. We're in a position to truly bring that forward. And so hopefully next month when we receive some further reports, I noticed that there are members from the CRC here tonight. We certainly made mention of you earlier. We welcome your presence. But certainly we look forward to the reports that are going to be presented to the government in due course. And we welcome any forward reform and positive thinking change.
So, one more question. So would officers be required, say, if they did get passed, probably to carry like a scale or something like that? Because it's some marijuana looks like it might be 20 grams, and then you have others that it might be 5.
Right. In terms of
Just some are lighter, some are denser, just different
absolutely.
types.
I mean, these are all questions, again, that have to be considered with the police officers directly. I mean, one thing that would be helpful is not from the political aspect, but to get that feedback from the police. But in terms of police experts, and this always brings a smile to my face, because I appear in court, like I said, on a daily basis, and I deal with drugs cases on a daily basis. And we have experts that talk about street prices, and I see certain street prices from back in like the 1990s, right? But in the context of looking at particular weights, when it comes down to weights, these experts would say that I have a familiarity with the streets. And so I know who the dealers are, I know who certain users are, I know where hot spots are. And so in the context of looking at weights, I think that there could be courses even within the police that they're not done already, like narcotics officers and the like, to be able to look at a certain amount of cannabis weed and say, this is roughly this much. At the end of the day, I mean, if one's a consumer, one can look at a particular amount and say, yeah, that looks about right, or no, that doesn't. So with the greatest respect, the police should be equipped to be able to make that assessment. Whether they determine it's an actual cost that they want them to take or not, will certainly be for that angle. But this is where we welcome the feedback.
Yes, I would like to know, like, you said it's going to be roughly like the same amount of marijuana and hash oil if they do it, like, so that would be like 14 grams of hash oil you go up to here?
Yes.
At any given day, that would be?
Cannabis and cannabis resin, yes.
Yeah.
Because what we, again, just to reiterate for those who come in late, we have the Misuse of Drugs Act, and under our Schedule 7 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, cannabis and cannabis resin are treated in the same regard. The Misuse of Drugs Act talks about what's deemed for intention to supply. And so the act is very specific by saying that anything over 20 grams will be automatically deemed for intent to supply. But let me just qualify this point later. For example, if I'm on a corner, street corner, we use a proverbial street corner, and I have $3,000 in cash, but I've only got 2 grams of cannabis on me. And for example, let's say there was some CCTV footage and there's com-ops, and so there are incidents that happen in certain neighborhoods where the police might act more readily or etc. And so for example, let's say the police had some suspicion that I had made a certain hand gesture with a particular individual, the police suspected that I had just sold some cannabis. And so the police come over to me and they see that I've got this large amount of cash, but I've only got 2 grams of cannabis on me. Right now, I could be taken to the court. Forget this amendment. I could be taken to court for intention to supply right now with only 2 grams but a large amount of cash in my possession. And so on that basis alone, even though it falls under the 20 grams, there we go. You have a lot of individuals who might come before the courts with 12 grams of cannabis, and the prosecution bring the case on the basis of intention to supply, even though the schedule says 20 grams or less. Conversely, if you look at the same schedule, it talks about cocaine and it talks about heroin. And so in respect of both of those particular narcotics, they only set 1 gram. Now, for example, when individuals, anybody who knows or uses cocaine, and so you say, for example, like an 8 ball, well, an 8 ball is more than 1 gram. But yet an individual can go get an 8 ball, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, and for example, you have what's called binge use and so forth. And so I might be looking to have a party over the weekend or over a particular day and acquire more than just 1 gram, but it was never for the intention to supply. That becomes a matter before a court that one would try and argue if that was for personal use. Unfortunately, another very young and esteemed counsel who I respect had tried this matter. And there was a very public case. There's an individual who went before the courts, had a couple of 8 balls, quite literally, and the defense counsel had tried to argue that this was for personal use only. And they made a lot of public news, and they had brought in individuals from court services to testify to the fact that an individual could use more than 1 gram and so forth, but the courts rejected it. So even though a user or a scientist or those in the industry can say, well, an individual can have more than 1 gram, they can still be treated under intent to supply. And the same work conversely. So when you look at law, the way that the law is currently drafted, it doesn't set all these different parameters. That's going to be a matter of fact and the application of fact to the law. And that's why often individuals come before the courts of lawyers. But one of the question marks is by saying, okay, listen, if we had a certain prescribed amount, be it 14 grams, 20 grams, 7 grams, and individuals know exactly what they're working with, an individual can say, okay, for example, I know that 14 grams is the prescribed amount. I'll go buy 7 grams, and I know that when I trot in my particular movements, that I can be safe under that particular 7 grams, by way of example. But if I want to take the risk of saying I'm going to get an ounce, then I know exactly what I'm working with in that context. And so in terms of being knowledgeable up front, having very clear parameters, because again, when we look at why, how these things have arisen, we've had court cases where on Monday, I mean, for example, my ex-partner, I remember a case where there was an individual from a cruise ship. The individual got off the cruise ship, had a certain amount of cannabis, and was put in jail for 10 days. I went to court the very next day, and I don't know if my advocacy might have been a little bit more point on the day or just the limit that day, but ultimately the individual I was representing had a very similar amount, didn't have that kind of 10-day window to look at, we were able to work with on. So there's a lot of different circumstances in the courtroom as to why different sentences are outcomes. But it seems with cannabis, when you just do a quick review on the news, you see somebody gets 1.3 grams of cannabis and they're getting a fine, and another person's getting 1.2 grams of cannabis and they're getting discharged, and people have question marks. And so those are things that we have to ask. Why are there these variations? And of course, that's going to come down to facts and the law. But what we're trying to do is just set a very straightforward parameter, looking at a certain amount of cannabis and saying we want to avoid people being found before the courts because of this amount. We're just trying to find something that the government might agree with, if they're going to agree at all. At this stage, I don't know what response the government will have to the proposed bill whatsoever. But what we're trying to at least do is stop individuals coming before the courts in that context.
What about if like cannabis is like THC level is real high or something? And then would it be a problem with anything like that, or straight what it is for the month?
Nope. And in terms of when it comes to sentencing, what happens in courts is oftentimes judges will look at the purity of something. But that's actually more applicable when we look at the harder drugs. So for example, if we had cocaine, somebody says this is actually 20% cocaine versus 77%. And more so when you look at the importation type of cases. When it comes to just actual possession, be it for simple possession or excess of blood, the actual quality doesn't really get assessed. In cannabis cases, I've noticed that narcotics officers have talked about certain imported cannabis that might be hydroponic cannabis. And they talk about it's at a higher THC level and the like. And so they try, and it becomes another factor of trying to generate on the profit margin, more so from the intent to supply angle. Because with the higher quality of the THC, the price point can go up. And so because of that, in the sentencing on intention to supply cases, but in the context of simple possession, it's just I had cannabis, I had a gram, 2 grams, 4 grams, 5 grams, etc. And so what we're trying to do is just create some uniformity across the board, whereas if you get caught in possession of cannabis under a prescribed amount, you're not finding yourself before the courts, you're not having a criminal record, you're not getting stopped from employment, you're not being brought publicly to particular authorities' attention, which may stop you from the stop list. At the end of the day, on the stop list point, Bermuda has no control over the stop list. It is entirely a matter of U.S. immigration and homeland security. And so that's why even individuals who have not even been convicted of crimes, some haven't even been charged for crimes, have found themselves on the stop list. But what we're trying to do from our end to Bermuda is do as much as possible for our people to stop restricting opportunities, but also to try and alleviate these stresses.
I brought up a good point there. When I was looking at the law, I saw the definition of cannabis is any part of the plant with the genus cannabis, right? So when I see like people getting charged with like having 2 immature plants, and then the police say, oh, it had a street value of $50 or $200. I look at it like something. You can't really sell an immature plant. Who sells, the stalk? It's not just stalk. So they'll take basically the root, the leaves, and basically if they had seeds as well. But I think that needs to change as well, because we have sold in stores now hemp seeds, and we have hemp protein. And if anybody knows what hemp is, it's cannabis. Superfood, if you want to call it. But basically it's cannabis. Anybody that don't know it's cannabis. They're selling cannabis seeds in grocery stores. So basically that part of the law needs to change as well, so that people are really charged with, well, if they're going to be charged, well, they're going to be charged fair, because nobody sells cannabis leaves, nobody sells cannabis roots. But if you get caught with a couple plants, they're going to say it had a street value of X, but it really doesn't. So I think that has to be addressed as well.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
good evening. A lot of this stuff, yeah, it sounds like it's based on a lot of the British law, which is, the police have the right to take away from young kids and different things of that sort. And even if the hemp itself is seed, where you can actually have a license for non-food product, if you're going to make clothes or paper and stuff of that sort. My other thing was looked at was if all of this is, the decriminalization is passed, and we do move further with this, as the other young man said, about the marijuana and the oils,
Yes.
and we're able to get into producing it ourselves, exploitation, right? Now, how do we get around the single convention of narcotic drugs Act of 1961? Which is, now, how do we get around that? Because that's an international treaty.
Let's ignore it.
Well, I mean, it's yeah, but I mean, I'm asking to put it out there. We need to,
Yeah, absolutely. I see Mr. Gordon is chomping at the bit, so I don't want to dominate the mic. I'll add more commentary after Mr. Gordon, but let me pass it off so we have some balance.
You are right to point out that that treaty imposes some pretty heavy restrictions on the shipment of drugs, of these drugs, between member states. Bermuda is not a member state of the UN and cannot interface directly with the UN. We are an overseas territory of the United Kingdom. So where the UK has authority to control our cannabis laws and policies, they will do so the way they do. They'll interpret that treaty the way they interpret it, which is that all herbal cannabis and resins must be banned unless they're made by a pharmaceutical company. That's the way they roll in the United Kingdom. Their own government experts have recommended that they legalize, but instead they follow the advice of the pharmaceutical company lobbyists who say keep it all illegal except for what we patent. And so if we go to legislate a change through our parliament, predictably, I mean I could be wrong, but predictably the UK's foreign secretary will tell our governor, oh no, we're part of the UK and we're treaty bound not to allow manufacture of this stuff, and especially not export of it. So you can't grant assent, royal assent to that piece of legislation. The governor has the authority to do that, and he'll take his orders in the matter from the UK's foreign secretary. In my opinion, the way around that, to relieve the UK of any power to do anything to us, since the UN can't, is through the use of ministerial discretion. Section 12 of the Misuse of Drugs Act gives the public safety minister latitude to write a regulation that would allow him to issue permits for medicine, which is allowed by the treaty, incidentally, and even for research. Incidentally, that treaty only requires that member states have in place laws to suppress cannabis as reasonably necessary. If our laws haven't suppressed cannabis, then they can't be reasonably necessary for that purpose. Therefore, even a full-out legalization bill wouldn't fall afoul of the treaty. The UN has very little power to do anything. It's the real threat to our ability to govern ourselves here is the UK, because they have taken a commercially oriented interpretation of the UN treaty that they will attempt to enforce on us if we give them a chance. So that's where we sit with the treaty. I don't think we're going to be able to do much exporting anyway, just because of the high cost of electricity and land here. More likely, if there's cross-border traffic in cannabis, it's going to be coming in from someplace cheap and sold here, as it could be cheaper to import cannabis oil than making it here.
never know. So it's possible.
Yep.
The cultivation will let me some of the best soil around, and you know what I mean? Our light span, it doesn't have to be inside.
That's right.
It's a way to make money.
Yeah, good question.
All right, so possession, simple possession, say it's two grams that the possession is. I'm exactly with this, right? Because as far as the course law goes, if you're caught with a certain amount of marijuana, the police or the DPP have the option not to take it to court, but it comes with the admission that you have them in your possession. And as soon as you admit it, even though you have no conviction, you are still eligible for the stop list. So how would the possession come into play? Would it be no mention of having it in your possession, would the police just allow you to go with it? Or how exactly would the legislation speak to it to protect people from potentially being on the stop list by admitting that they had possession of 2.0 grams?
Sure, Senator Daniels, the criminal defense attorney and senator, can explain better than I can. I just want to separate two things. First, we talked about the caution policy where you could get a caution if it's 2 grams or under, and then there's this other issue of this decriminalization of 14 or 20 grams. But you're absolutely right, it's the admission of guilt that triggers the U.S. stop list, and I spoke with the consulate about it, and they said that if we switch our system to a U.S. style first offender system, that they will not stop list cannabis, simple possession, first offenders. And the way to do that is to allow them to enter probation without admitting any culpability. Then they don't trigger the stop list trigger that's part of U.S. immigration law. If we switch to that system, the way the whole U.S. has in many other countries, there wouldn't be any more stop lists for first offense, small, simple possession. Now I have to do it with the senator.
Even the context of when we looked at trying to do this amendment to the Misuse of Drugs Act was very specifically geared towards what kind of powers police would have in relation to an individual carrying something underneath the prescribed amount. And so within the context, we looked at trying to do a further schedule, a Schedule 8. And the intent and spirit of that was to somewhat foster the relationships between police and the community. And so earlier in the night I was saying that if you had a minor, someone under the age of 18 years of the age of majority, then the police would have powers to actually seize the cannabis from the minor, but only from the minor, unless the circumstances were such that an individual was trying to smoke or consume in public, or smoke moreover in public. And the police would have an approach to the individual to cease smoking in public, in particular in certain places, and the individual didn't want to comply with that request, then there might be the application to seize the cannabis in those circumstances. But the intent and the spirit of the intent is really just trying to foster an environment where we can actually promote some respect for the law of individuals, because if we can have some to and fro, then we can actually proceed in a more holistic way. So if you have under the prescribed amount, the intention is not for you to be arrested nor to have the cannabis seized, unless you're going into some further environment. So we looked at things like the increased penalty zones and the like, and obviously we want to have certain deterrents from those contexts. So if you're going to go into an increased penalty zone like churches, nurseries and the like, and certain things. Now there's interesting, in the public context, because it's very important to also bear in mind, the way the law operates right now is, for example, where I live, I'm not in an increased penalty zone, but where you live, for example, might be an increased penalty zone. Automatically, right off the bat, if I was sitting on my lawn, consuming something in this car, in those circumstances, if you actually had the same type of scenario, we will have 2 different punishments just because of where you live. And those are some things that we might need to consider some further amendments with as well, just in terms of actually where individuals live. Because I've seen numerous cases where an individual might purchase some cannabis and drive home, and then they get stopped on the road, and where they actually get stopped happens to be an increased penalty zone. And even though where they live is not an increased penalty zone, if they were on their way to their home, they're going to get charged with the location of where they stopped, which happens to be an increased penalty zone. And I think you'll find more times than not that those stop and searches take place in certain areas, so almost everybody who comes before the courts finds themselves with that extra caveat of the increased penalty zone.
Are there any other questions over this side?
I think there's many ways to address an issue, but what I think I've heard so far is that the underlying policy rationale for the party promoting a decriminalization is that there's very many people who are made criminals by the current policy.
Correct.
But the difficulty is, as far as I see it in my mind, that we're dealing with somewhat of a symptom. Because if we understand the reason why this policy is put in place in the first place to make certain people in our country criminals, and we understand the underlying rationale of it, I don't see how, with the greatest respect, decriminalizing any amount of cannabis really addresses the issue. Because so long as there is a limit, first point, that means that someone can still be stopped, still be criminalized psychologically, still be targeted by the police for the suspicion that they have over that limit. Furthermore, because we have certain laws in place, for instance, stop and searches, you just mentioned it, it gives a carte blanche right to quite racist policies being applied to a certain segment of our community. So would the party, this is the question, would the party, along with the policy of decriminalizing marijuana, also be cognizant or willing to also do away with the ability of the police to use other policies to decriminalize?
That is an excellent question, Mr. Johnson. First and foremost, I am a member of the party, and it was the people.
315F.
I know very specifically. I just wanted to kind of give some backdrop. Of course, I came into the party in December 2012 after the election as an appointed senator. I still have my free speech, and one of the things and the beauties of the Progressive Labor Party that I find is that we at least have the ability to speak up, criticize one another, criticize actions we've done and the like. And it's an open forum in that regard. I find that the Section 315F is one of the most prejudicial, horrible, worst offending laws, and regrettably it was my party that passed that particular legislation. And I'm disgusted by that particular legislation and the implications of it. And I know that's very bold words for an officer of the court, but I stand by them. Just as equally as I stand by the Section 110, which was the newly imposed, and some might see that I'm trying to take up a case to challenge that particular legislation. Yeah, we do have some legislation that, quite frankly, deals with our society in a certain way that is just unjust entirely, in my view, especially when we consider the consequences and what realities have come from it. Respectfully, though, I can't answer your question at this juncture. It's a great question to ask, and I have no qualms saying it like that, but unfortunately, that is not an issue that's been up for further discussion. It's something that I think that needs to be tested in the courts first. And quite frankly, if there was any individual, I'll make the public service announcement, who's been caught with a Section 315F search, please call me and I'll do a pro bono so we can challenge it. And I see Mr. Johnson's president in the room as well. I'm certain that his constitutional wisdom would be of great merit in taking that forward. But certainly it's something that we should address in the courts, because at this stage we don't have the power unless the government's willing to revisit it, and certainly understand the politics of it. There might be some challenge of us trying to challenge something that we initially brought. So with the greatest respect to my own colleagues, that is a particular law that I personally do not support or favor.
Good evening. I just have a question in regards to marijuana use in treatment of ADD or ADHD in adults.
It's a little touchy, that one, because you're dealing with young kids. ADHD in adults? Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Yeah, I've come across research that cannabis is useful in treating ADHD. I mean, if you look at the effects, what does it do? It calms you, relaxes you, helps you sleep, and helps you eat. Basically, it's, and if you take too much, you try to overdose, it can kill you. And you can't say that about Ritalin. So, just on that alone. If you compare the drugs that people prescribe for ADHD, you compare cannabis. Yes, you might not want to take it, certain strains before class. You might want to take certain strains if you want to drive. And those sort of things, I believe that would make it much more important to allow home grow cultivation, because we could grow particular strains for particular times of day or for particular ailments. Say, for example, if someone had depression, you give them a high THC strain, and they would sit there and start thinking of their life in a different perspective, in a different way. Whereas someone that maybe had bipolar or ADHD, you give them a kush strain, and it will basically give them a coach lock. So instead of bouncing around the room, they will just sit down. And on top of that, we have, they have high CBD strains with low THC that are coming out. And CBD is sedative, and we have other cannabinoids in cannabis that I believe that we can actually develop, our own industry in Bermuda with the different strains. And yes, it's a new industry, it's a new field that the doctors, frankly, don't have a clue how to handle, a clue at all. They cannot handle it. There's 66 different cannabinoids in cannabis, and a total of 400 different substances. And physicians know about one of them. They know about THC. They don't know about the ratio of different cannabinoids and how different strains affect you differently. They think cannabis affects you one way, but that's not true. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And just one more question, because I'm also here for educational purposes as well. You kind of touched on the question already, but you talked about side effects of marijuana, as there are side effects of many other drugs as well. And when you read them, you determine whether or not it's something you want to use. That's for me. And I believe, I think Mr. Gordon saying at one time, correct me if I'm wrong, that you would not use some of the marijuana sold on island because you didn't know, or I'm not saying verbatim what you said, but whether or not it was good stuff or not so good stuff, and how would the public know what's good or versus what's not so good stuff without actually trying it?
There are being developed currently handheld testing devices. I believe it's called Mycana. I have to get back to you on that one. I can pull it up in just a sec. It's a handheld device that they're developing now, they're taking pre-orders for, that cost about $300, I believe. And you basically put a small piece of the cannabis in the machine and it will analyze and tell you how much, if there's pesticides, if there's contaminants, the proportion of cannabinoids. But commercially, the machines that they use is mass spectrum liquid chromatograph, or they also have gas spectrum chromatograph. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Big words. But yeah, they have testing equipment that can basically say what proportion of cannabinoids are in the cannabis. But yeah, again, it highlights the fact that the cannabis that we get in here, we don't know what it is, where it comes from. It could be from Mexico, it could be from Jamaica, and from what I'm perceiving, the majority of cannabis that's coming in is either haze or sativa strains. That's what I'm perceiving. So yeah, there are testing equipment available, and I think that it's a good idea to basically regulate the industry so that if someone has a batch of cannabis and they want to know if it's lead inside, they can go down to the office and say, oh, test my cannabis, tell me if it's okay. And they'll say, that's okay, or no, it's full of mold, it's full of fungus, or it's full of pesticides. So, yeah.
I want to go back to your question about ADD, ADHD, and also then address some of the testing issues. With regard to ADD and ADHD, it's a disorder that counseling doesn't do a whole lot for. People sometimes get better as they get older. The medical option right now is amphetamines, Ritalin and Ritalin-like drugs. Those are amphetamines, and they cause permanent brain change, kidney damage, liver damage. So whether or not cannabis is a miracle treatment for ADD and ADHD, as some parents say it is, or whether or not it's just a ruse, the way some doctors may scoff at it, it couldn't be worse than what they give people now. Now, with regard to testing of cannabis and knowing what's in it, in most jurisdictions where medical cannabis is available, where patients can choose what type they want, they typically, a patient can see an independent lab test that tells them what percentage THC, what percentage cannabidiol, and what percentage cannabinoid acid. And between those three major cannabinoids, they can pretty much get a sense of the effect. And that independent lab test will also show that it's free of contaminants. And when we've got medical cannabis here, it should probably be that way if there's any commercial side to it. And that's how you really know that it's free of contaminants. There's some brickweed that floats around this island that is visibly rotten. You can smell the rot, the formaldehyde and the ammonia coming off of it. People smoke it anyway because the dealers won't bring it in more until it's gone. And that's what I won't touch. And I can tell even without a test that, no, I don't want that in my body.
I just found the website. The product is called MyDX. The website is indiegogo.com. INDIEGOGO.com. So it's INDIEGOGO.com. They have 4 different products. One for cannabis, one for water, one for air quality, and another one for organic substances. They're available for pre-order right now. I think they should be available by the end of the year, I believe.
Another question here. We're talking about the 14 to 22 ounce per se
Grams.
grams. And what we was talking about,
I would really get crucified if I answered yes to that.
well, it's good stuff. That's fine. But I was looking at the aspect of we was talking about cultivation.
Yes.
What is considered as to be cultivation? Meaning that if I see the trees coming online, they'll come in my yard, I cut that tree down. Am I still cultivating, or is that considered 14 to 20 ounces? Yes. I mean, I'm just on that.
That's cultivation.
That's still cultivation.
And once you plant the seed in the ground for it to germinate, that's going to be constituted an offense as the current law stands under cultivation. And just to repeat, the way that we had formulated the particular amendment was not considering the issues of cultivation. Again, our approach was very finite in its intent, and that was a first stop measure in terms of looking at individuals coming before the courts. As I said before, there is a full regulatory model that we can consider and certainly entertain. There are individuals, again, from the CRC who are here tonight who have started to undertake that process and apply that research. We, as the opposition, cannot produce what are considered money bills or bring money bills to the House. So in looking at issues of cultivation, whether it be for medicinal purposes, recreational purposes, and the like, very logically, there would be a license and or tax structure associated with it, similar to cigarettes and alcohol and so forth. And so those are money-generating aspects. And so those are things that we have not put forward in terms of what we're bringing out, but for the longer discussions, that's something certainly that needs to be entertained if we're going to have a holistic reform discussion.
Okay, but is that considered to be vet or dry weed? I mean, because in the sense that I just cut it down, came from brew with it, right? And it's still vet. Now that's still went 14, that grade.
Yes, okay, I understand what you're saying. At the end of the day, it's this way. Once we have, you're going to formulate an offense under the basis of cultivation. So I'm a police officer and I have information, credible information to go to your house for the purposes of doing a search under the Misuse of Drugs Act under the offense of cultivation in that context. When I go to that property and I see tools of the trade, I'm seeing the genus, the cannabis genus, cannabis resin, then I can try and formulate my case against you as a police officer in the Crown on the basis of cultivation. Now, if you're talking about the context of I then, not being a police officer, now come to your house to purchase some of that freshly grown cultivated cannabis, and you sell me stalks and leaves and the like, and I have a whole branch and I'm walking away with it, in that context, if it's under the prescribed amount, then that would not be under the offense of cultivation, that would be simple possession. And so just trying to look at it from in the round, those are two different angles to consider.
Hi, good evening, panel. One question around medical use. And Alan and Michael, you guys might be better suited to answer this. When it comes to medical access, do you envision, am I going to need a prescription? Or is it just going to be if I decide to take Tylenol, Advil, or herb for my ailment? Because what is being said, at least in some parts, is that doctors in Bermuda will not write a prescription for cannabis because it's not FDA approved.
Yeah, there's liability issues with doctors in prescribing cannabis because it's considered by the U.S. government as being, dangerous and highly addictive. So any physician, just on that basis, would not want to get involved with cannabis because they can lose their license and all that hard work of studying, they could basically get thrown out. The way I envision, basically would be. Well, the way I would hope to see the system would be someone, basically uses prescription drug. The prescription drug gives them severe symptoms, severe side effects that they don't want. The cost is another factor. And cannabis is useful in treating that ailment. So the way I see it is that, the whole market will be outside of the doctors, so basically a handover from the doctors to another industry that will be controlled by quite possibly another regulatory body, like Cannabis Trade Oversight Committee, for example. And like as I said, doctors, they can understand one molecule, THC, but when you throw in the other 66 cannabinoids and the 400 total terpenes and flavonoids that impact the cannabis, they can't handle it. So on that basis, you need to give it to the people. And I personally believe that the patient should be controlling the cannabis market entirely. Because they're the people that use it, they're the people that know its effects, and they're the people that can, basically, they tell you, if it works or doesn't work.
So patients should be able to grow their own?
I believe so. I believe patients should be able to grow their own. I believe home growth should be allowed, and if a patient is not able to grow their own, I believe someone should be able to be designated to grow for them, especially someone who has a massive green thumb.
Just on the side note, I do know there's certainly more than one doctor in the country who is entertaining this. The sad reality will be most likely that when that doctor, should they apply for an application to be able to prescribe, we might see a change in heart amongst other medical professionals, especially at the dollar value, which would be a sad indictment on the profession, but it's something that we'll have to consider. But this is certainly a new burgeoning industry overseas, and I'm certain that it will be one here. The question is the context in terms of, there's been some criticisms about whether there's going to be reform in a way which will empower some who have always been empowered, and whether this will be another marginal tool within segments of society. And so that's where again we have to have that very holistic discussion of making sure that this is a very fair and balanced process going forward.
I've got one more comment about that. The doctors here certainly have been reluctant to recommend cannabis and put forward an application for a permit to the public safety minister. But as of last weekend, there was a public announcement by one doctor, Dr. Christopher Johnson, who said he will not charge patients. That if they've got a need for medical cannabis, they should call and make an appointment with him and discuss it. He's willing to consider, at least in the most serious cases, where mainstream medicine isn't working, putting in an application for that medical cannabis. So there's one doctor, and that'll start, and the rest will follow.
My question is concerning money, putting forth a bill concerning a money bill as a bill. Money bill meaning taxes for the government, not necessarily a money-making bill for the public. So to me, I'm of the opinion that we should fully legalize there anyway, and there should be no taxes or license fees at all, especially for the first 10 years, because just like how we give concessions to retailers and we give concessions to hoteliers, they can give concessions to the people who start out in the business, so that there is a way for them to get on and get into it without being hobbled by unnecessary taxes. I had a recent photograph I saw online of a guy smoking a split saying he just bought an ounce of weed in Denver and he's a bigger taxpayer than General Electric. No, we don't need that to happen, you know what I mean? That is the issue that's happening in the States. The tax is so high that it is in fact driving people back to the black market, which they're trying to eliminate. So in order for us not to sabotage ourselves, I think that the opposition could put forth a legalization platform with no money attached to it. Of course, they're going to hate that, but we would push it far enough. The amount of opposition to government in the House would mean that it couldn't be voted through by the opposition if the government didn't agree. But at least you're pushing that eventuality. I have always called for legalization forever, because I don't believe in half measures and things that would be ineffective and actually counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. The fact of the matter is that on Saturday's paper, I can look in there and see a guy who's got a legitimate business inside the mall. And despite it being illegal to sell cigarette or tobacco materials without it being labeled as to the tar levels, this guy's growing his own tobacco and selling it. No cops are running up to his house, tearing it all down, batting a stick over the head, and, you know what I mean? Putting him in jail, stop list, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So if this island is willing to continue with the hypocrisy of having tobacco and alcohol legal, and something that is beneficial and relatively harmless, then we're completely lost. You know what I mean? But that's just my opinion.
So, there's merit to the argument. Certainly that's something for a wider discussion. I think that without trying to dictate that kind of conversation, one of the angles is there's an argument that by having a licensing and taxation regime, the government can recoup certain monies that are in the internal market, which can
plus you'll have circulation in the country, and people who are generally locked out,
Yes.
probably unemployed currently,
Yes.
will be making money.
Yes.
Empowering,
Agreed.
so
Agreed.
that's my thought.
Again, there's very different arguments in terms of how to look at the situation around. So for example, as I was just trying to say that, not to advocate one side or the other, you can have a scenario whereby the government, like cigarettes and alcohol, is collecting certain taxes and it collects license fees and all that. There's also the concept of looking at concessions, but even with the business models that are being set up, there's the way of economics involved. And so we're looking at how we try to approach from a medicinal standpoint, a local market standpoint, simple consumption, what kind of conditions are going to be there? Are we going to have checks and balances? What would be the offset? Do we want to have quality control so we can have individuals testing for quality controls? I mean, these are the wider discussions that need to be had, and certainly I think, I'm hopeful that another entity has been looking into and that will be presenting there for further discussions of this nature. And certainly this is the kind of discussion where we are really on the cusp. Should we look at this and really entertain this genuinely, not just in a figurative sense, but with purpose to go forward? How can we make this, if we are going to consider it as a viable option, an option which is going to empower us as Bermudian people, from welcoming visitors to our shores, but also all the ancillary sides, but looking at how do we benefit in the most holistic way possible. Ensuring that individuals, there's been some discussion, for example, who would control it, who would have access to it. And so, for example, even though I'm an advocate for cannabis reform, if there was any proposals put forward by the government which said that somebody who had a criminal conviction could not enter the market, as much as I want cannabis reform, I could not support that bill, even having drafted something in my own context, in my own heart, because we want to see people being able to benefit, right, in terms of the long run. And so these are all the kind of things that we have to look at from a holistic standpoint, in terms of the full balance. I think it was, Mr. Bernie, want to add something else?
Yeah, I agree with that point. But in a sense, like, I feel as though the government needs to have some sort of incentive to regulate the industry. They need some sort of incentive. Because from their point of view, it's political risk. Because you're going to have some people that will say, legalize cannabis, regulate cannabis, you're going to make money over cannabis and it's killing people. So, from their point of view, they need to have some sort of incentive. But at the same time, the taxes can't be so high that it'll drive the price up. Because if you look at the cost of producing cannabis here, you've got to import seeds, you got soil, you got lights, you have to pay for it, you have electricity. You know how Belco is. Belco is crazy, you burn 12 lights and you're going to be paying $1,500 a month, at least. $1,500 plus, depending on how much you're drawing. And all those sort of costs add to your final price. And at the end of the day, if you could buy a pound of cannabis in Jamaica for $100 and bring it back to Bermuda, it's going to be cheaper that way than, say, someone who's growing it with a government-issued license. So that who's going to stay in business?
Importation could be banned, I would think. It's not only, I don't think it's legal anyway, but it would make sense if we have a ban on the importation of milk products to give Mr. Dunkley a monopoly, which I don't hear Gobier mentioned when they mentioned the Belco situation, but the same with the herb. You don't want to be bringing in cheap herb and undercutting good ganja that can work right here.
It's important to consider that. You don't want to have too much high taxes so that it will drive people back to the black market, and people who will be able to stay in business is those that can import.
How does my judicial system feel about edibles?
Pardon me, edibles?
Edibles.
Well, in terms of the current status right now, from once it is classified, whatever the edible is, we're talking about brownies, cakes, and so forth, any kind of food products that are containing the cannabis genus, once it's proven to contain the cannabis genus, then it constitutes a criminal offense under our current laws.
How do you weigh it though?
Yeah.
There are going to be challenges with that, but again, there's testing. Because remember what happens, just from a practical standpoint, when any individual is arrested with any alleged controlled drug, the individual may be taken to a police station for question. They will be placed under arrest and so forth. And then they'll be granted police bail while the item in question is then sent to our government analysts for testing. And so that's why you always see a situation where it says that the police have arrested an individual on suspicion of a particular controlled drug. And it's not proven to be a controlled drug until the government analyst signs off on it, and one of the criteria is to attach a weight to it. So if the government analyst is not in a position to actually prescribe the weight, I haven't seen a scenario like that, where an individual's had a food product or taken and then tested. then they might put a range, an estimate, based on certain quality controls that they're able to do in terms of looking at THC balances and the like, if they have that kind of knowledge and skill set. I haven't seen that case come before the court, so I can't speak to it, but certainly as it stands right now, once it's in the food product, as long as it can be tested to be part of the cannabis genus, and it will be constitute a criminal offense, and that alone can be an indicator for whether or not, and of course we're not looking at amounts. And so if we're talking like cake loads, quite literally, then there might be some argument as to whether it's supply and personal use and so forth, but those are things that can be approached right now. I just haven't seen that case, which would be an interesting test study.
Sorry if I come back again, but this comment prompted something in me. In my mind, it's two different approaches. If you approach the subject of decriminalization or legalization from the perspective of trying to allow people to smoke or allow people to eat, as opposed to trying to kill the criminal justice element, they lead to two different results. And that keeps me in a bit of an ambivalent position. Because as far as the criminal justice position is concerned, which is the reason why you say you promote the policy, I don't think anything short of legalization will work. Because if there's a regulation involved in it, forget the taxes for the government, there's still an element of criminality that will be attached to anybody who violates it. So that's not, they don't satisfy. But as far as the legality is concerned, it is done. It leads me to have a problem as well. And the reason why is because understanding the constituency in which we're trying to protect, if that's the case, I think from a real life perspective, no matter how anybody likes it, they depend on the trade being somewhat illicit.
In its current form,
in its current form.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if it's converted to legality, we're going to see it taken over by big business, those who can control it, and we're left out in the cold. Like constituency is left out in the cold and left to go to some other illicit affair. Unless these mindset of those people change before you do those type of things. So has that been considered? And what's the position on it?
Okay. On the first context, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, I want you to repeat the latter part because the way that the echo was going,
I'm sorry.
Catch on.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I seek legality.
Yes.
The first part, I seek legality, the only way to kill the criminal justice problem.
Yes.
But it's not now altogether clear or altogether convinced.
In the regulatory model, if you were to look at that, where there's regulation.
Sure, that's just right.
Pausing for a moment just on that point.
Yeah.
With respect to regulation, take for example alcohol as it stands right now.
We don't do this, but our constituency doesn't deal alcohol the same way that we deal in.
True, but in the context of selling alcohol,
sure.
No, that's an important point. Because without the license or the proper permit to sell alcohol, because you have to go to the licensing tribunal to sell alcohol, so this establishment needs a license. If I was to have a set at my house and wanted to sell liquor, again, at my house, it's going to be my household. But the point is that when looking at the selling part, then you contribute the act and then you have this kind of criminality that is being put forward. Now in the context of what are the implications in relation to alcohol versus cannabis, where there's the jail time element and life imprisonment is the sentence, even though it's not applied, then yes, absolutely, there's no comparison. But in the context of a legalized alcohol market, in a regulated alcohol market, we still have this constitution that you're speaking to, albeit not on the same level as what I know that you're getting to. And then the second point I was just trying to understand?
The second point is no matter what we do as far as legalization is concerned, you turn the industry or you turn the use and the supply and over to those people who benefit from the use and supply of anything else that's legal. And we're not even in the mind, we aren't even in the mindset, the constituency we're trying to protect, are not even in the mindset.
Yes.
Are not even in the position to benefit in the way that is being promoted. So, they may benefit more. With the greatest respect, on a real life terms,
of course,
from the trade being illicit.
But this is where, again, where we have to see what the kind of context can be. Mr. Bernews wants to speak to it too, but that is a very primary concern. As I said before, looking at the issues of criminality, convictions, and everything else, I go to support a system that's even looking to put bars and barriers on individuals. Because I can see one of the first contexts to say, well, for example, you're a senator and you're a lawyer, and you don't have a criminal conviction. Therefore, you're someone who we consider to be a suitable individual to apply for a particular license for, let's say, my wife, who has a property which is hotel zoned. And so why should I want to entertain and consider the opportunities of looking at medicinal tourism? But if my friend to my left doesn't have the right letters behind one's name or the right clean record in terms of antecedents and what other kind of factors involved, and then access to banks, lending institutions and the like, private funds, private sources of funding, then yes, we're going to have a battle. But that's where the holistic approach has to come from. And if we're not looking at it from the holistic approach, then we're not being genuine at all in our approach.
And that's essentially the reason for my second point, that because we're not even in a position to take advantage of those things because of our societal structure, is it worse to legalize than to leave it illicit? From a real life perspective.
I love your reasons. Thank you.
I kind of understand what you're saying about people that's involved in cannabis trade depending on the illegal, but I kind of sort of disagree, and for a couple of different reasons. So the way the cannabis market is now, right? You have people that would rob you. You know, you can get your crop stolen, which happens all the time. You get people that actually threaten you with calling the police. They say, hey, I'll call Crime Stoppers if you don't give me such and such and such and such a price. You know, you have violence to resolve conflicts. If someone doesn't want to pay for a product that they got fronted, or, you know, if someone was given a short amount, they thought they was buying a quarter, but they actually got 3 grams, but they got more, they come back with a machete. That's part of the criminality aspect, which I feel as though if it was a regulated industry, disputes could be settled through court or in other means rather than through violence. Because with how the black market is now, the only way of resolving a conflict is violence. And I believe that with a regulated industry, you would eliminate that or reduce it.
I understand your point. I'm going back and forth because this is important to me, because it's the heart of it. All of those things exist, but they also exist for legalized things as well. All of those challenges exist around the question of money and around the question of trade and agreements. The reason why you can say that about the trade in the moment, or the environmentalists in the moment, is because of the illicit trade, with other non-illicit trades. The minute you change that dynamic, you change the whole to a way of looking at it anyway, and we have to find other things. The very constituency you say you're trying to protect has to find other things to beat you up for, kill you for, to enemy for, unless we get in the business of actually doing it. But we're not in the business of doing it. We're not even oriented enough to do it at the moment. So is the question of making it legal now, or the question of dealing with it like that now, a wrong move?
What do you mean?
That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying don't legalize it. I actually tend to support legalization for one reason or another.
Can you clarify what you mean? Or you said we're not in a position to enter it because people are already growing.
Well, yeah, it's not growing, but it's illicit.
Okay. But if they was to be able to be given licenses to grow, they would do it legally.
But they gotta get a license. No, this is the real issue, right? The issue is this: you said somewhere earlier in your presentation that they're not like these machines where you can test the benefits of the properties of the marijuana or whatever. Anytime I see something like that, it gives me the impression, wait a minute, big business is already lining up itself to make a mint off of people who are made illicitly. They're going to be shut out. If you legalize it, they will assuredly be shut out unless they get in the position to make benefit on the trade. So the question becomes whether or not we are lending our people who, in real life terms, are supporting themselves illicitly. We're turning them over to another problem by legalizing at this moment. You see, follow my second point? You follow my second point?
Great reason.
Put a lot of thought into that. I mean, can I comment on
I
that?
have put a lot of thought into it.
It's a very important point. And my feeling is that let's look at the Dutch model in the Netherlands where they quasi-legalized, and lo and behold, every smuggler, every grower, every customs agent on the take, every cop on the take, every magistrate on the take in Holland did better after legalization than before it, believe it or not. So if you were growing before, your price dropped to only one third of what it was, but you could grow 3 times as much with no hassle all of a sudden. If you were a corrupt customs agent, you don't have that problem here, so I can talk about that example without embarrassing anybody. It used to be you got paid X amount of money to look the other way when a container came through. Now all this, and everybody was watching you very carefully because your job was to stop that. There was a lot of heat on. Now all of a sudden, the person who was offering to pay you to look the other way is no longer threatening your life. He's no longer, he's not giving you as much to look the other way, but he's doing it 3 times as often, and there's not as much heat on either of them. I once watched then Senator Al Gore convince the waste hauling mob in Pennsylvania. I once watched Al Gore, then a senator before he was vice president, convince the waste hauling mob in Pennsylvania that moving ahead with recycling legislation wasn't going to cut into their waste hauling illicit activities. It would enhance their business activities and make so they'd be making more money less illegally, even though they would still be the mob. And I think that while those people who are engaging in illicit activities or even corruption might fear that they'll lose out, they don't have a lock on the market right now anyway, and they'll be just fine.
Thank you, listen.
Yeah. Essentially, the concept, I don't have to repeat and explain what Robert Johnson is saying. But looking at that in the round, absolutely. These are the real legitimate questions in terms of what we have to see. All I can say at this stage on behalf of the Progressive Labor Party is that although these are the things, this is the reason why we're having this type of public forum, because it's exactly the kind of reasoning and feedback we want to receive in terms of getting a comprehensive model. That's a different model from what we're looking for right now from a decriminalization standpoint, entirely different. But because we welcome this context in the round looking at decriminalization, legalization, the various uses and the like, it's an excellent, view on excellent reasoning and question to have. It's probably, with the greatest respect to everyone here tonight, that reasoning and question was one of those fundamental issues that there are structural challenges in this country in terms of the disparities of wealth, social income, race, and the like. And that is the fundamental question which some individuals have said to me when I first started going on this path, that this type of discussion is going to have in relation to this country. I just want to pause again because we do have another body, we have quite a few members here, but we have Mr. Stratton Hatfield, who is, I believe, the title president of the CRC, Cannabis Reform Commission, who's present in the room as well. So we welcome his presence, as well as all the other members that are here tonight have contributed as well. Individuals who are looking at this from a very holistic standpoint, and we're looking forward to the reports that we provided to the Minister of Public Safety and hopefully announced within the next month or so. I understand Mr. Bernews wants to address, but thank you.
I actually have that very same concern in terms of monopolization of the cannabis industry, or potential cannabis industry in Bermuda. And for that reason, that's why I believe that patients should control the industry. I believe that patients should be people who are able to grow, and only patients and designated caregivers, meaning someone that is designated to grow for them. I do not believe that there should be businessmen that grow cannabis or any other person besides people who are patients themselves. And I believe that if we take that sort of model, that you wouldn't have this commercialization, which I'm 100% against. Because you're going to get somebody with a business degree that says, okay, I want to go into the cannabis industry. It's going to maybe grow about 3 strains, 4 strains. But I still believe as though we the people should benefit from this because like you said, people are already dependent on cannabis for their income. I know plenty of guys that all they do is sell weed. They don't have a job. They don't want a job. They sell weed. And I believe that if we can move them to a regulated industry, rather than them having to resort to all the tactics of the black market, that they can be legitimate business owners and entrepreneurs, and instead of being the scorn of the society, be respected as the businessmen and entrepreneurs that they are.
I'd just like to build on what the gentleman over there says. We already have a situation where you can't say the wrong people, but the people that aren't part of any grassroots sort of marijuana tool, the social, economic inequalities, the human rights inequalities that this law is bringing about. We have a smoke shop, and it's tacitly sort of saying, yeah, come to us and you can buy your tobacco-based products. We all know it's what we go in there for, and it's not representative of anyone in this room. The people that smoke marijuana, we don't seem like a true cross section of the public that does, but we definitely do, and I'm like one of those people, and my life is being impacted by what I see is a human rights decision that I have to put in my body. It is stopping me from gaining employment, and again, it's the prejudicial views of the system that until we can address and honestly address race, economics, social standing, things that nobody wants to come out and say, that, you know, I went to VHS. I know who, we know who's smoking, and it's generally everyone, but we also know who's getting caught up in, like, in the criminal justice system and in economic sort of catch-22. I don't agree with what you said about people that want to live on the fringe of society. I would like a job. I would also like, I see it's my God-given right to consume a plant. And we're just talking about the medical aspect. It is a plant that can be used from seed. The whole plant can be used. It's a sustainable plant.
I'll retract that. I'll speak for myself. I don't want a job. I want to be an entrepreneur. I'll speak for myself. I don't want a job. I want to be an entrepreneur.
Okay, fine. Well, I'd just like to get on to that.
No problem.
Wait, we have a question.
Yes, greetings to the panel and to the congregation that has gathered here to discuss this matter. I'm talking from the standpoint of a Rastafarian, and the United Nations has a declaration. So how could they have a declaration that denies me my human right? So that means they shall furl up, like the League of Nations done, because they are against their own declaration. You say you have a member of the OBA was here.
I think that's what I would
What I'd like to address him. Like, how is this party, or like say the PRP is here representing, how are you defending my human rights? Because we have seen recently that different lifestyles have been
fulfilled.
Okay. Yeah, failed. So how do you plan on rectifying that problem? Because people of my faith, like I said, we have carried the burden in Bermuda for this so-called drug. We don't see it as a drug.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a drug addict, or neither are a lot of my brothers or my sisters. And we know that a lot of people in Bermuda do use it because of fear of being prosecuted and discriminated against in the society. They were high and do it. But like the sister said, a lot of people in Bermuda smoke herb, but undercover.
Absolutely. It's without question that even some of the commentary that I made in relation to these types of forums is that getting people to come up and speak, there's a lot of fear. There's the fear, I'm sitting here right now on the microphone, is my boss going to see me? Am I going to have problems? Is the police going to try and stop me when I leave down the road? Who's going to think that I'm using drugs or whatever the description is going to be in whatever context? There's a lot of negativity implied with this. I mean, this is the taboo conversation, and unfortunately, as you said, Rastafari faith has been on the front line taking the brunt of all this criticism and everything else. And if it wasn't for the certain musical aspects of glorifying and trying to give some kind of positive feedback, the fact that we're even waiting for other jurisdictions, that's the biggest frustration to me. The fact that we have to wait for other jurisdictions to move forward before we can believe in ourselves to look at our own path and choose our own destiny, that's the biggest frustration. The fact that it has to be justified by what Europe's doing or Latin America's doing or what progress is being made in the United States. We should be looking at this issue outright and boldly, from the human rights standpoint, from the religious standpoint, from the lifestyle standpoint. It's a whole liberty. The question is right now, because it's governed by laws, what can we do to look at the laws? With the restrictions that we have as our, let's just face facts, colonial status, and working within the confines of our colonial status, how do we try and navigate these pitfalls? And this is where we need to have all legal minds on deck, trying to look at this issue, if we're going to be sincere in purpose and heart. Otherwise, we're just paying lip service. And so that's why, for example, when Mr. Johnson's come down and given certain reasons in terms of the implications, they go far and wide. But unless we're willing to have that conversation, then this is just a waste of time. All we're trying to do in terms of the Progressive Labor Party at this stage, and you have to appreciate, one thing in the context of politics is not every person is going to see eye to eye. Not every person is going to understand everything, or reason and value. So we have different opinions. And that's the beauty in terms of the context of our party, serving the party I stand by, and the ability to have different opinions but move with purpose. The first purpose that we're trying to do, although this has been a long, centuries-old fight, is at least make the step right now, or we can stop people going before the courts. Can we use this as the impetus to go forward? Well, the buck effectively is in the government's court. If the government can come forward and say, yes, we're willing to make these steps, the Progressive Labor Party is looking to work with the government to make sure that we do not have these problems going forward. But this is the steps that we have to take, slowly and steady. And I know it's not good enough. I stand by your side saying quite rightly and frankly.
So there's baby steps that they're taking. Like I said, for the people of my faith,
it's the biggest hindrance and it's the biggest disrespect, and I'm sorry, and I can only apologize for it.
But it's like I say, it's a human rights issue.
Yes.
countries that go into war to fight for human rights.
Yes.
So us as the Rastafari faith is saying, okay, we use this, like say we eat it, we drink it, we smoke it. And we consider it a sacred drink.
Yes.
It's the Lord that stays spiritual. It's in the Bible.
Yes.
And we have a lot of Christians go to church every Saturday, Sunday, and it's the Bible they have when they pray to hallelujah job.
Yes.
That's the word of God.
Mr. Gordon came to me a couple of weeks ago and actually discussed whether or not we could look at challenging the human rights aspects of the courts. And I had accepted that I would be willing to take on that issue from a fundamental free program or whatever you want to call it, just from a fundamental standpoint. To whatever extent I can push the issue and explore, absolutely. And I know that there are other incredibly bright minds in this room who are more than willing to give reason and assistance. So I'd be calling on anyone for that purpose, but I definitely would be more than willing to investigate, research, and try and fight that cause. I mean, if we're going to be in a progressive society and mindset, and we're going to look at what is human rights in terms of the steps that the government's taken, the government's laid down a marker in terms of human rights. We've looked at sexual orientation. We still have to work on discrimination in terms of age. We still have to look at issues in terms of cannabis and religious rights. And so if we're going to be in conscription, without question. So if we're going to be looking at this issue of rights, we have to be looking at the realm. And that's definitely a cause that there are many individuals willing to fight. And I'm definitely more than willing to put myself forward to examine and explore.
But it will be limited to those who ascribe to the faith. And that's another requirement that will have to be gotten through. And another avenue of the coolest I'd like you to find out. Because they're taking me as an idea. Usually they try to little things, and they'll compress them to this, and they'll say, no, that's not his faith. Reality.
Yes.
Say what now?
I'm sorry. One constitutional lawyer to another. One constitutional lawyer to another. Whenever a court has an out on a party political issue, a conservative court like Bermuda takes the out. So they will compress a man's faith or a woman's faith into the narrowest box they can get it in, so long as the fundamental issue is not addressed. So they'll look at this man's faith, he'll understand the tenets of his faith, and the rest of it. They'll either say one of two things, because they've already said it in England. They've already said that Rastafarianism is not a religion. That's the first thing. And it comes to human rights law. They've already said it. If they get past, I understand the point, but if they get past that, and I think they should, it's right, then it becomes a question of whether or not you're manifesting in a certain way. This is some of the issue in conscription, whether you're manifesting it, whether the use of the blend, and whatever is manifesting it. There are so many outs for a court. I can assure you that's a dispute that would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 years with no variable outcome. It's not a good idea. To run it that way, you have to find some other mechanism that takes away the out for people of this faith. You find that? Not research, nothing to do with that, but an argument.
The idea of questioning whether a religion is a valid religion and if it's being practiced properly have been abandoned.
No way.
Rastafarian has been found to be a religion.
In some context, it is a religion. You appreciate that. I'm not speaking to whether it is a religion. I agree.
Actually, it's not, right?
It's not a religion. You see, they don't even claim it. But it's a philosophical belief. It's a philosophical belief.
We claim they are.
It's a philosophical belief that should be protected. I agree with that. I'm speaking to the fundamental principle that a court looking for an out will find an out. I say, I'm a lawyer, I do this every day.
At a certain point, though, when a court uses any excuse it can to suppress something, that the public, if it hits a certain points of ridiculousness and the court just makes up an out because it can, they will lose the respect of the public.
I don't want to go back and forth with you, but I do that.
Guys, let's calm down.
No,
we're asking questions. We're asking questions.
I'm only bringing my qualifications to bear on the discussion. I'm a constitutional lawyer. I argue these things day in and day out. It's the only thing I do. And I'm telling you, it's a political matter. When it's a public law matter of constitution, whenever there is a sliver of hope in the court shooting down an issue, I've seen our courts do it time and time again. I fought conscription for 7 years. There's not been a rationale for it yet. but it's still legal, isn't it? You see? It's not a question of whether it's a lifestyle, whether it's right or wrong. I'm not saying that. I agree with that. But if the avenue that's going to be approached is a legal one, a legalistic one, and you're going to go to the court for the answer, you will not get the result that you're looking for.
What's the answer?
And
Just to
what
break
you're
the law.
saying, just to break the law.
Just to break the law, like a report.
Just break the law. That's what you're
How much prison space they got?
Wait, guys, you got a question. Yes, all right.
And everybody really
The religious side of it, what you're saying is true inside the court. First of all, Rastafari is a life and liberty. Being a life and liberty, my next question wants this way. Since what we're talking about really is dealing with bias, racist system in the first place, and since it's a life and a liberty, the question really has to deal with the system's fighting me for being black. Not even being black, but being black and using what is my culture. Am I right? And to that is like actually address what it's saying is the loophole that they use. And unless Bermuda actually addresses that, we're always going to be staying in a circle that is talking about.
We run from that.
I'm sorry.
We run from that conversation.
And that is a problem.
But yeah, we're shut down if we raise it.
The world wants from that problem. That's why Mexicans have so much problems. Indians have so much problems. It's a one-sided point of view. My opinion has always been white man's ice is always better, with no disrespect. It's every day that both benefit for making you a criminal, benefit for legalizing you. They only earn the business. The only people that's getting caught is us. The only people that's supposed to be, quote, business-minded, scientific-minded, is prejudice of black skin. Until that's addressed, we're always going to have this problem. In Africa, recently, when some of our brethren made a trip back in South Africa in particular, they was going to stop a concert that certain brethren was going to have, which showed that it's in not just an island game, but going everywhere that you, every nation that you, until we as a people stand up and say, we're tired, we don't want to deal with that no more. We're always going to have this problem. It's still just, like I said, one-sided. You're only supposed to buy water from one person. That's the problem. Early day, when they was inside the hemp industry, and they had the chance to do what they had to do, reinventing what they're doing now. Only they can do it. For us, we're supposed to be quiet about it. That's the problem. Until we get politicians that actually address that. We don't follow the politicians. It's all a political game, you know. Yeah. My life and liberty is actually belongs to the Almighty. That's why it's a life and liberty for us to form.
Yeah, thanks.
Greetings. Hello. Thank you so much for putting this on, first off. I'd like to give some appreciation not only to the panelists, but to the organizers who have put this on. It takes a lot of effort to organize an event like this, and I think it's really informative for people to come out and learn more and to speak up about this topic in particular. I think that this topic needs to be addressed from multiple angles, and I think that it's initiatives like this that help enact the change that we're looking for. So I wanted to give thanks to you guys for putting this on. Once again, to Alan and to Michael in particular, thank you for pushing for this, because you guys are the ones that are really the catalysts that are really pushing forward for this change. So thank you guys. Like these gentlemen have been saying, this is a multi-layered issue. This is something that is coming from so many different angles and so many different topics, and it's really hard for us to kind of wrap our heads around it, because
it's just deep. It's really deep. And, you know, myself and the members of the CRC have been focusing on this for the past 3 months now, and we are learning so much more about this topic. And one thing that is an overarching theme of this is that this is a human rights issue, like many of you have been addressing tonight. And until we deal with some of our other social issues that have been going on for centuries, how can we really overcome some of the issues that are related to cannabis reform? To go back to the economic point, in that we're worried about people taking advantage of this system and essentially profiting from those that have already been making money off of this. So essentially stealing the trade from who has been selling it already and taking it and putting it into their own pockets. I have an issue with this personally because you've seen it happen with other substances in Bermuda. Alcohol is a perfect example. Cigarettes are a perfect example. And if we're talking about legitimizing this and making this a trade for people to actually earn a living off of, then I think it's now is the time for us to understand that there's got to be a way for us to make this a business so that everyone can be involved with it. This gentleman here is shaking his head, and I mean, I don't see why we can't focus on that right now, seeing as this is like a new industry or a new trade for us to go into. You know, we're talking about small business development and empowering small businesses in Bermuda. If we're going to be looking at this, I think in particular with cannabis, there's potential for us to allow for small businesses to focus on this only and not give it to the bigger hands. And there's a way for us to empower those people that have been distributing this so-called illegally to give them the means to be entrepreneurs, give them the means to sell this legally, that is, in a way that is not necessarily, well, I think there's a way for it to be regulated, but it's a way for it to be understood so that everyone's on the same page as to how it's being grown and how it's being distributed and how it's being used. But also going back to the human rights tip, I really do think that that's one of the fundamental issues to this, is that it's the right for us to put something into our body, okay? We have the choice to do that. We have the choice to put sugar, and we have the choice to put processed food into our body. But when it comes to something like this, which is a natural plant, it's 2014, I feel like we should be able to put whatever we choose to into our bodies. But yeah, I have a question about prevention for you gentlemen. We know in Bermuda we have an issue with abuse. We have an issue with addiction. People have been addicted to alcohol in this community for years. Not only that, but they are addicted to nicotine and they are addicted to sugar. These are epidemics that are going on in our country right now. If we introduce something like cannabis and say that it is legal, how are we supposed to reduce the consumption of this plant so that people are not addicted to it? That is my question. We don't want more people addicted in our society. We want less people addicted. And that's in general. I mean, we can talk about technology, we can talk about sex, we can talk about chocolate. There are so many different things that are addictive. I think it's important for us to look at this from a prevention initiative. So, okay. Michael, thank you.
The name of the chemical is cannabidiol. You either write it down, go home and look it up. Cannabidiol. Cannabidiol is actually an anti-addiction substance. It's anti-addictive, and anti-addiction, it's antipsychotic, and it's anxiolytic. It's neuroprotective, and it's antioxidant. Cannabidiol. So what we need to do, if you want to look at reducing addiction, we need to control the strains that basically we allow. If we promote strains that have moderate to high levels of cannabidiol, such as Kush, then you're going to get that effect that reduces addiction. And I came across an article, a scholarly article about cannabidiol reducing Q-induced heroin-seeking behavior in mice. People always say that marijuana is a gateway drug. But, as we was talking with Dr. Lester Greenspoon, is a gateway out of heroin addiction. Okay? Cannabidiol is anti-addiction, anxiolytic, and is neuroprotective antioxidant. So basically, the substance cannabidiol can reduce your cravings to be addicted to anything. So that's why I think that what we need to do is look at the strains that come in, and the only way you can do that is by allowing regulated homegrown cultivation. Because like I said, when we get imported, most of the time it's sativas and haze strains that have little to no THC. If you put that THC in the cannabis, it becomes far less addictive.
But Michael, reality is that most of the cannabis on the market right now is in high levels of THC, which is highly addictive, which is something that a lot of people are choosing to consume.
Okay, well, again, the THC, again, when my president earlier, we talked about anandamide, and anandamide being endocannabinoid. Anandamide is in your brain already. You are addicted to anandamide. You are already addicted to THC because without it, you'll die. Anandamide regulates all other neurotransmitter functions in your brain. You need to look it up. Anandamide, A-N-D-A-M-I-D-E, is critical to every cell's function in your body. So quite literally, yes, we are addicted to marijuana. We are addicted to it because your body needs it.
I'd like to address some of the concepts that have been brought up. To call THC highly addictive would be an exaggeration because it's amongst people who use cannabis, the percent who go on to use it in a fashion that even could be called dependent, meaning regularly and heavily, is no higher than for any other drug. The next point to raise is that being dependent on cannabis, as some might call it, or using it every day heavily, as others might call it, is not going to be nearly as debilitating as being hooked on heroin, crack, or sugar, which will give you diabetes, heart disease, cancer, tobacco. Now, while you can say all these things about cannabis and how it's the nicest thing to be dependent on compared to other drugs, I still see the validity to go, well, why have anyone be dependent? Okay, let's look for, especially kids, how do we absolutely minimize that? And I would like to point out that it would seem from US data that dollar for dollar, when you spend money on prevention, those prevention strategies seem to work better, dollar for dollar, on regulated substances like tobacco and alcohol compared to prevention attempts being made for unregulated substances. These prevention attempts just don't seem to work for the wholly illicit substances. For some reason, it works better when the substance is regulated. So that's how you increase prevention, decrease dependency. There is no reason to believe that a ban has anything to do with the levels of dependency that we see in society. It just hasn't, there's been some studies on this comparing jurisdictions. The rate at which people use cannabis, the number of people that use cannabis, has little to do with whether it's legal or not. So certainly legalizing or regulating shouldn't be expected to increase dependency.
If I could just say one more thing. I mean, we have reports from the DNDC and treatment officers that are reporting students as young as 8 years old using cannabis. And we also have people that are going for treatment for addiction to cannabis in Bermuda. They're not addicted to anything else. They're saying they're addicted.
I'd like to meet one of them.
Are they being sent for treatment by the courts? Are the courts sending them for treatment as an option?
No, they're volunteers. They're volunteering themselves.
I would love to talk to one of them.
I know it's hard for cannabis users to admit this. It's hard for cannabis users to admit that people could be addicted to this substance. But there are people out there that are saying they're addicted to it.
People are addicted to ice cream.
Well, that's a good point.
But people get addicted
Addiction is a disease. It's a mentality that people will have.
It's a psychological.
Yeah.
The distinction that we draw
straight, and then go a year ago,
the distinction between say being addicted to heroin or cocaine and being addicted to cannabis is that it's, like you said, it's a psychological addiction. Meaning, if cannabis makes somebody feel good, say somebody's depressed and they smoke cannabis and they don't feel depressed and they keep using cannabis, would you call that addiction? Or if someone has insomnia and they can't sleep till 4 o'clock in the morning, like me sometimes, after a long day work, and I gotta make 8 in the morning. If I smoke weed to help me go to sleep, am I addicted if I smoke it every day? But if I don't smoke it, then I can't go to sleep? Whereas someone that's addicted to heroin, if you stop using heroin, everybody's gonna know about that. Everybody will know.
Same with cigarettes.
Same with cigarettes. You can be physically addicted to those substances, but you can't. Who's physically addicted to cannabis? I would like to see the research that shows that people are physically addicted to cannabis.
There's data out there, mate. There's data.
Well, I mean, then again, you know, we have to talk about endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. Whereas the neurotransmitters anandamide and 2-AG are made in your body from essential fatty acids. Now, supposing someone's diet is deficient in omega-3s and omega-6s, which your body makes anandamide and 2-AG from, that person quite literally will benefit from the introduction of exogenous cannabinoids, aka cannabis. So some people quite literally do need it.
Yeah.
There's no way around that.
I understand that completely.
I think Brother Hatfield makes a very good point, regardless of whether or not we agree or disagree with the substantive data. One thing that we've seen is that whenever it comes to matters of science, there can always be conflicting opinions. As it comes to matters of law, there can always be conflicting opinions. And so for the purposes of this dialogue, there's no need to hash out in terms of who's right, who's wrong. For the wider audience that's listening on Bernews or other media outlets, these questions, so are genuine questions to ask. When it comes to the data, though, there's legitimate questions that have to be asked. So for example, one, with a lot of young people, when you say they're going before addiction services, for example, is that the result of a court order? And of course, there's been a response that it might not be. When it looks at cannabis in Bermuda, period, a lot of individuals in Bermuda, because of either the price point on cannabis, in terms of trying to stretch out some cannabis, might use some tobacco with the cannabis. So from the context of a young person getting access to cannabis, it's all legitimate questions to ask. Is the young person getting access to the tobacco element? And is the tobacco element, which is what seemingly becomes the trigger for an addiction to the cannabis, if they don't ordinarily smoke cannabis straight? These are all the kind of questions that, for example, I don't know where all the data is in the NDC, but in terms of looking at, I mean, I've seen some reports, and I have to concede I'm no expert in terms of statistical data. But one of the things that we have to look at when looking at the round is that there's never going to be a perfect scenario. So for example, we are going to have systematic positive results and negative results, but we can have abuse, and that's without question. And so just like any particular substance, when it comes to food, when it comes to water, when it comes to sex, when it comes to anything, we can have addictions and we want everything, and moderation is key. The question though is whether the state should be trying to systematically control this particular substance in the manner that it is currently doing so, as juxtaposed with other systems. And so when we look at the scales, for example, cigarettes, and we say that cigarettes have a high addiction rate, yet we can have cigarettes that are accessible pretty much on every, we can call blocks, but in most business establishments, there's access to cigarettes. So within a very short square mile radius, you can get cigarettes. The same can be said with alcohol. We've just extended the sales of alcohols in different environments to Sunday, so we've now made it more available and accessible in its own right. Although there are checks and balances that are being put forward, there's been other debates that have been had as to whether or not, for example, licensed establishments like bars are able to curtail alcohol for young people, but does that apply to grocery stores and other kind of outlets? And so no matter how we look at it, there's always going to be balancing risks. The question is whether or not from a family level, grassroots level, and so forth, how much can we put forward that's going to empower in the wider sense while trying to trigger families to do what's necessary in terms of raising children. Without question, I don't think anyone's advocating for a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old, etc. to be consuming cannabis.
Unless they're ill.
Unless they're ill. And then that's the other kind of context in terms of the medicinal. But then this is where we have to look at it in the round. The question on addiction, which was being raised, however, is a very fundamental question to ask. But with a black market society, for example, is it widely accessible? And if we had a regulated model, is it widely accessible? Is it legalized? Is it widely accessible? These are all the things that we have to look at, but the steps that we're taking to not make progress do not appear to be working for us, and I think that's as much as most people around the room can agree. The question is in terms of how we infringe on rights and how do we infringe on health, or how we inhibit health. And I think that we have two panelists that have kind of the overwhelmingly majority position that we need to be looking at health from an assistance perspective as opposed to merely striking it down. Yes, sir?
So, I just want to give an example. Would you rather me be addicted, say I'm addicted to marijuana? Would you rather me go to the deal on the street, to a public get a credit something from and not have the money next week, and then come to my house, do something to deal with family, or me go to a clinic job, or a prescribed doctor or anyone like that, dispensary, purchasing it, and then I do have a problem, but I can also get treatment at the same time. That's what I would rather,
I think it's
than
a
someone to go on the street.
rhetorical question.
And also there's the issue of dealers who sell crack and marijuana.
Exactly, and next thing you know, you get people spike drugs.
I have a neighbor that lives at the top of my hill. Nobody check my address, right? I have a neighbor that lives at the top of my hill that has multiple sclerosis, and this lady hasn't worked for years. Now, as you can imagine, she has 2 sons that, you know, depend on her husband that's working his butt off, and she's been on these multiple sclerosis drugs, and they don't work. They don't work. They're highly narcotic, and she can't function. But her son who smokes weed happened one day to develop marijuana, and she felt good, and she could function. And I see her walking on the railway trail with her stick, and it helps her function. But where does she get her weed from? She gets it from the dealer. He rides around on a white bike, he drops off weed to this lady. He's got another customer down the hill, drops off the crack rock to this guy. So do you want guys to be getting the marijuana from someone who deals cocaine and someone who and deals marijuana in the other hand? I don't. That's one of the reasons personally why I'm against buying marijuana in Bermuda, because I don't want to buy from someone who could have stopped on it, as they say. Somebody knocks over some cocaine on the weed and you just wrap it up and sell it. No.
I just wanted to revisit the point that Mr. Johnson was touching upon. What I was hearing him say was that, is it going to be worse to legalize herb if in the outcome is that big business takes it all over, and then the people that have defended and dealt with it so far are being shut up. So I want to just mention the developments I saw in Jamaica. We had Miguel Lauren, which is a prominent lawyer over there, and Ross IOV started the Westmoreland Health and Cannabis Growing Association, something like that. And they came out literally the day before yesterday, and made a statement to that effect, that they are demanding the exclusive rights to the business opportunities afforded by legalizing marijuana to be given to the poor, the grassroots, and the Rastafari people who have been defending this thing, taking bat and stick, licking the head, having their weed cut down, children taken away, money seized, life ruined, shot, etc. That when these laws are drafted up, there's going to be regulations. It's not going to be about, you can only have 2 spliffs, you can have 3 spliffs, you can have 1 seed, 3 plants, all that crap. It's going to be about big business, if you have a track record of fighting against marijuana, you'd be lucky to get it for medical use, right? That's the type of regulations I think should be put in effect, so that it's ensured that the people that should benefit do, in order to create a cottage industry type model instead of big business, where multiple people in multiple parishes can have, if any limit would be put in, it might be on the expansion of these cottage industries to keep them within a reasonable level. But when you consider that a fatal dose of marijuana is 1,500 pounds, smoke within 15 minutes, it's ridiculous to put any limit on ganja. Ganja is so safe in fact that even I'm not trying to belittle the point that Stratton made, which is an important point about addiction and people being hooked on substances, which does happen even with her, because addiction is a mentality. You have an addictive personality. If it's cheeseburgers, you're addicted. If it's TV, you'll get addicted. It just happens to be marijuana at the time, or herb. I don't even like to use that marijuana word, right? But these people would get treatment. The stigma would be removed for them to seek treatment in the first place. And secondly, treatment for marijuana is not like alcohol, where you can literally die if you go cold turkey. It's like, if you go cold turkey, you just can't sleep good, you don't have an appetite, you're a little disagreeable for a couple of days, and then that's it. It's not life-threatening. So you got to keep that in mind. People are blowing it out of proportion with some of these regulations. Like in Denver, they have a narcotics officer who wrote the entire, rules that govern the sales and everything. Now, they have $18,000 licenses and 37% tax, and they have microchips planted in every single stalk of weed, and they trace every seed from the seed to the sale under surveillance. you know, 24/7. Now, they don't do that for cigarettes. They don't do that for alcohol. Now, but, you know, come on. These people are off their rockers. So it's got to be dealt with better than that, right? So it's up to the people to force the regulation that they want.
Yes.
People run the government, right?
Yes.
We're not living under tyranny here where the government says, well, we don't like it, we don't think it should. Well, who the hell do you work with? You work for us, mate.
Absolutely.
So that's how it works. You know, let's make them know who the hell is the boss around here, as far as I see.
I know, Tyler, so let me touch on that for a bit, because it is something that me and Mark speak about quite often. And that is that you are the power. The people are the power. If you don't like what the government's doing, you don't like what the opposition's doing, you get up and you tell us that's what you don't like, that's what you want, that's what you want to happen. That is where the power lies. The power lies within you. And if you exercise that power, trust me, you'll get things done a whole lot faster than the pace that they're being done now. Exercise your power. Always remember that.
They brought up a study on Colorado where they said they had the most people in rehab for marijuana.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Well, if you give me a choice to be locked up or go to rehab, right here.
Yeah, I just want to go back to that state and ask my senators, my party senators, if you could report that's from hearing everything and hearing the discussion. In my opinion, I think it should be looked at. Because this is like a head of lettuce. You know, healing, that religious, health, this, that. Everybody's got something to say as far as why they should smoke. But the way I see it is, we should really be looking at this as exactly what it is, a human rights issue. And looking at past legislation, nothing, let me state this clearly because media is in-house. I have nothing against the homosexual community. I'm just using this as a reference. If you're going to tell me that I have to allow homosexuals to reside in my household if I'm not allowed to rent or whatnot, because it's their human right based on the Human Rights Act, but yet I can't indulge in a naturally grown plant in my own house. There's something wrong with that. And I think we need to focus on it. When it comes to addictives, being addicted to it, come on, really? If it was legalized, you have it planted for you're able to grow it. Who cares if you're addicted to this plant? It's right next to you. You can pick it up and take it. You're not honing for it. You're not searching for it. And you're not lacking in it. The only time addiction becomes a problem is when you lack it. Or you get overdose. And as it's already been stated, you can't overdose. But I do want to put it to my senators, since they're in attendance, to really think about how we can put this forward as a human rights issue. Because at the end of the day, that's all it's about, a human rights issue. I might not be a Rastafarian, but just because they use it for spiritual beliefs or for their reasons, why can't I? Why? I might not need it because for a medical reason, but because he has an appetite problem and he can smoke it, why can't I? If it's good for him, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Agreed.
So it's a human rights issue, and I think to just throw away that head of lettuce and just serve it as an apple, human rights issue, and it goes across the whole board either way. Thank you.
I think you have a point of clarity. I think everyone's to rest easy because anybody is a person who's trying to find the best way to regulate the use of anything and change the power dynamic in this country is me. And I don't see it as a question. For instance, talk about the medicinal uses. Talk about the benefits of it for this reason or that reason. To me, is not the essential issue. The essential issue is, it's been jockeyed around in this way because certain people make huge amounts of money when it's being illicit, or certain people have enough power to jockey it around in this way. The essential point being made is that if you're going to now support decriminalization as a first step, just to get the monkey off our back, yeah? But you can't stop there because you still got other problems in terms of regulation. Now, if we could regulate in a way whereby the power imbalance was addressed, whereby essentially those who are criminalized for it at disproportionate rates, right, come to benefit from it, and those who sell it and those who trade in it but who are not seen are not allowed to do that anymore. So one thing I noticed, when Mr. Hatfield was talking, he talked about entrepreneurialism and small business and whatnot. But this trade has never been small. Never. But he's starting from the position that those people who remain undercover don't exist. They exist. They are the big businesses. They're the same people who exploit us every way, shape, or form in our society. They are the ones at the crux of the trade. And when they say they want it to change, it will change. But it will change for their benefit. So if we're going to regulate, rest easy, my brother. If we're going to regulate, we have to be able to address the power imbalance. And if you're not going to address the power imbalance, if you're not going to address how it's been used and how it's been junkied around, don't do nothing at all. Because we're not going to benefit from it, we're going to destroy it.
Are there any more comments? I think we've had a very positive, very positive discussion tonight. I want to thank Mr. Brandon, I want to thank Mr. Gordon, and of course my fellow Senator Daniels, for coming out and for having this very worthwhile discussion. I had a few people in the back say to me, you know, we should have more of these. We should have more of these, and I can promise you that we will have more of these. We have our deputy chair in the house, another deputy chair. And we have one of the organizers here. I know they're taking notes of how we can do things. It doesn't have to be about this particular topic. It can be about other topics that are very, that are on the minds of just the everyday individual. And I think getting together, discussing, and getting your opinion of how we are doing, especially the politicians, is very important for us. When we go into chambers and we talk, we like to talk about personal experiences of things that we've heard or things that people come up and talk to us about. Because at the end of the day, like what has been said, we work for you. You need to tell us what you want, and that we are the mechanisms to go forth and try and articulate and try and get those things done for you. So have no fear. Pick up the phone, call. Everyone knows how to get in contact with us. If you don't, ask, and you shall have. I see one more question in the back, yes?
I just have a comment. If people who have not voted on the survey that we just put out recently, if you can check out our Facebook page and vote on the survey that we put out there, it would be really helpful to help us collect more data around people's opinions on this topic.
What's the Facebook page?
The Facebook page is facebook.com/crc.bda.
That's crc.bda.
crc.bda. It's at the top of the page.
Yes, sir.
First, I have a question. How close do you think that it is to getting this bill passed? Does it look promising or?
We're looking to have it big this week, huh?
Yes.
Let's push back.
Are you still advocate the PLP that's pushing for this?
No. One thing about the Progressive Labour Party is that we work always as a collective. And so while we might have different views and opinions, we contribute, but we are one collective team. So party leader Mark Bean had asked me to come forward, one in the context from a legal perspective, trying to look at the decriminalization issue. And so from that perspective, I volunteered to look at it. I had the assistance of the other legal minds in our team, so the former Attorney General, as well as MP Michael Scott. And then everyone in the team has contributed in every which way imaginable, looking at the various ways that we can try and bring this issue. I mean, there's been substantive debate about health issues, religious issues, the human rights context. We've had similar discussions internally, so I don't stand alone by any stretch of the imagination, that's for sure.
I think Senator Daniels is being modest because he did say that this started last summer. That we've been going back and forth. And I can assure you that it actually started before that. I've been a senator now for 3 years, and it's something we've been discussing on how we can approach it, how we can produce bills for it, since we were the government and moving on. So it's not something that we've sat on our laurels doing. It's something that, as Senator Daniels said, a collective. It's something we've all contributed to and gave some thought.
One last question. What actually classifies something as a drug?
White people.
In this context, what classifies a drug in this context, our laws are the Misuse of Drugs Act and the Misuse of Drugs Regulations. And Schedule 7 sets out what the laws, what the drugs are. So those controlled drugs.
So there's no actual definition of what classifies something as a drug. It's just pretty much what I tell you is a drug.
Pretty much.
So like you said.
Power. They ain't gonna power to the party, they ain't gonna power to anything.
Well, with that, I want to thank you for coming. Again, I want to thank the panelists. I think they gave a wealth of information. And look out again for another one of these in your constituency. One last thing, guys, I wanted to say. If we're supposed to debate this bill, the House is supposed to debate this bill very shortly, reach out to your MPs if it's something you think that they should be voting for. Reach out to your MPs and let them know your opinion. Let them know your opinion. Grab a few friends and get to your MPs, let them know your opinion. Thank you.